Daniel Mercer ripped the gold ring off his finger and slammed it on the table so hard the champagne glasses rattled. "I didn't steal this. I didn't ask for it. And I'm not going to pretend I did." The entire Whitmore family went silent. 20 feet away, his 7-year-old daughter was watching him with wide, frightened eyes. And Claire, his boss, the most powerful woman in the room, was staring at him like she was seeing him for the very first time. What happened in that lake house over one weekend would either destroy everything Daniel had spent 12 years building or give him something he never knew he was missing. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to be here for every part of this one. Daniel Mercer was elbow deep in a busted water heater when his Friday afternoon went sideways. He had a system. He always had a system. Pick up Lucy at 4:15 from the Kellerman School on Maple. Stop at the grocery store on the corner of 5th and Birch. Not the fancy one, the one with the dented carts where the cashier named Rosa still called him Honey, and be home before dark. That was Friday. That was every Friday for the past 4 years. He didn't need excitement. He needed structure. When you're the only parent a 7-year-old girl has, structure is love. The property was one of Whitmore Development's mid-tier rental units on the east side of the city. A 3-floor walk-up that had been slowly falling apart for 6 months while the building manager kept filing maintenance requests nobody responded to. Daniel had gotten the call at 7 that morning. Emergency. He'd driven out, taken one look at the crawl space beneath the water heater and thought, this is going to take most of the day. He was right. By 3:15, he had fixed the primary valve, replaced 2 corroded pipe fittings, and was working on the secondary bypass. His knees ached. His shirt had a brown water stain across the left shoulder. His hands smelled like copper and old rust. He had exactly 42 minutes before he needed to be in his truck driving across the city. That's when he heard heels on concrete. In 12 years of working maintenance, first for a small residential company, then for Whitmore Development, where he'd worked his way up from crew to senior supervisor, Daniel had learned to identify people by the sound of their footsteps. The building manager walked with a shuffle. The assistant property coordinator clomped in thick-soled boots. The delivery guys from the supply house always came in pairs, always loud. Heels clicking precisely on concrete, evenly spaced, no hesitation. That was someone who expected the floor to hold. He pulled his head out from under the unit and looked up. Claire Whitmore was standing in the utility room doorway in a charcoal gray blazer and dark trousers. Her dark hair pulled back in the kind of effortless way that took significant effort, holding a leather folio against her side and looking around the room like she was cataloging everything wrong with it. Daniel blinked. Then he looked over her shoulder, expecting to see her assistant, or her operations VP, or literally any buffer she normally kept between herself and actual human beings at her properties. Nobody. Just her. He set down his wrench. He didn't scramble to stand. He stood up because it was time to stand up, wiped his hands on a rag that was already beyond saving, and waited. He'd been working for Whitmore Development for 6 years. In that time, he had spoken directly to Claire Whitmore, maybe 11 times. Not because she was rude, she wasn't not to him. She was simply absent from the parts of the company where people like Daniel existed. She communicated with him through his direct supervisor, Marcus Webb, who communicated through the regional property manager, who eventually passed information down to Daniel in the form of work orders. That was the chain. That was the system. It worked fine. So her being here alone in a utility closet that smelled like mildew and pipe sealant made exactly no sense. Mr. Mercer. Ms. Whitmore. She looked at the water heater. She looked at his tools laid out on a drop cloth. She looked at him. Is it fixed? We'll be in about 20 minutes. She nodded once. Then she said, pack enough clothes for 2 nights. Bring your daughter. A pause. Daniel waited for the rest of the sentence. The part that explained what she meant and why she was saying it to him personally in a utility room on a Friday afternoon. That part didn't come. I'm sorry. My family has a lake house 3 hours north. We're leaving tonight. I need you there. He stared at her. For what? I'll explain in the car. Whose car? Mine. He picked up his wrench. Not because he planned to go back to work immediately, but because holding a tool felt like an anchor to sanity. Ms. Whitmore, I appreciate that you're my boss, but I need a little more than that before I put my kid in the car with... It's not a work assignment. That stopped him completely. Then what is it? She was quiet for a moment. Not the kind of quiet that came from uncertainty. Claire Whitmore didn't seem uncertain about anything ever. This was the kind of quiet that came before someone said something they'd rather not say. My grandmother's birthday is this weekend. My entire family will be there, including my former fiancé, whose investment group is currently in talks to partner with my company for $42 million. Daniel waited. For the past several months, I've told my grandmother I was seeing someone. She's been asking to meet him. She's 76 and her health has declined this year, and she specifically said she wanted to meet the man in my life before... She paused, recalibrated. I need someone to come with me. Someone believable. Someone who can hold a conversation, handle himself under pressure, and is not going to be impressed or intimidated by anyone in that house. Another pause. That's you. Daniel set the wrench down carefully on the drop cloth. You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend? For one weekend? In front of your entire family? And my former fiancé's people, yes. And a major investment partner? Correct. He laughed, not meanly, just genuinely. The kind of laugh that escapes when something is so far outside your expected range of experience that your body doesn't know what else to do. Ms. Whitmore, with respect, that is an insane thing to ask a person. I know. I'm your employee. If this goes wrong, it won't affect your job. She said it without a breath of hesitation. I want to be explicit about that. If you say no right now, you come in Monday morning, everything is exactly as it was. There will be no consequence, no shift in how your work is evaluated. Nothing changes. You say that. I mean it. People in your position always mean it when they say it. She tilted her head slightly, and something moved in her expression. Something that looked almost like she'd been waiting for someone to push back on her for a long time. That's fair. I can't prove it to you with words, but I'm telling you it's true. Daniel looked at his tools. He looked at his truck keys on the shelf above the drop cloth. He looked back at her. Why me? Because I've watched you work for 6 years, and I've never once seen you try to make yourself look good. You just do the work. That's my job. I know. That's why I trust you. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside in the hallway, a door opened and closed somewhere above them. The building settling. My daughter comes. I said, I heard you. I'm saying it again. Lucy comes or I don't. Of course she comes. Something about that. The ease of it. The complete lack of negotiation caught him off guard. He'd expected a hesitation, a compromise, an inconvenient clause about a child being present at a formal family gathering. Instead, Claire said, of course, like it had never been in question. Why? He asked. Your grandmother insisted. She knows about Lucy. She knows a great deal about Lucy. Daniel went very still. Because what that meant, what the only way that could possibly be true meant, was that at some point in the past, Claire Whitmore had talked about his daughter, had mentioned her, by name. With enough detail that a 76-year-old woman 300 miles away had formed a picture clear enough to say she wanted to meet her. He hadn't known that. He didn't know what to do with it. One condition, he said. Name it. Monday morning you're my boss again. Whatever happens this weekend stays there. We don't bring it back. We don't reference it. We don't let it change anything about how we operate at work. It's a clean line. She met his eyes. That's exactly what I want. He nodded once. Give me 20 minutes to finish this repair. She blinked, like she'd expected him to leave immediately. You're going to finish the repair. The tenants need hot water. Takes 20 minutes. I don't walk away from a job. Something happened in her face. So quick, he almost missed it, but it was there. Something that might have been the first genuine, unguarded look she'd ever given him. She stepped back out of the doorway. 20 minutes, she said, and her heels clicked away down the corridor. He called Lucy's after-school program from the truck, explained there'd been a change in plans, asked if she could stay until 6. He called Marcus Webb and left a voicemail saying the East Side unit was squared away and he was taking the weekend off, personal matter. He drove back to his apartment, which was 12 minutes from the property on a good traffic day. He kept his hands at 10 and 2 and didn't turn on the radio. "What are you doing?" He genuinely didn't know. He knew the smart answer was nothing. The smart answer was, finish the repair pickup. Lucy, buy groceries. Go home, live your life. You don't get into cars with your CEO on a Friday afternoon and drive 3 hours to a lake house and pretend to be her boyfriend in front of her entire family and a $42 million investor. That was not a thing that happened to people like Daniel Mercer. But she'd said, of course she comes, without blinking. She'd said his grandmother knows a great deal about Lucy. And Daniel, who had spent 4 years being a single father in a world that mostly treated him like a logistical puzzle to be solved, had never once had someone outside his very small circle talk about his daughter like she was simply naturally part of the picture. He packed a bag in 9 minutes. Dark jeans, 2 flannels, his one good button-down that Lucy called his grown-up shirt, his toiletry bag, his work boots, and his other pair of boots that he wore when he wasn't working. He didn't overthink it. He was good at not overthinking things. Overthinking was a luxury for people who didn't have a daughter waiting to be picked up and a water heater that needed fixing. He picked up Lucy at 5:45. She was sitting on the front steps of the after-school building with her purple backpack and her hair coming out of the braid he'd done that morning, talking animatedly to one of the teachers. When she saw his truck pull up, she sprinted across the sidewalk. "Why are you late? You're never late on Fridays." "I know. Get in." She climbed up and buckled herself in with the focused efficiency of a 7-year-old who had strong opinions about doing things independently. "Are we going to the grocery store?" "Not tonight." "Are we going home?" "Also not tonight." She turned and looked at him with the full force attention that children deploy when they suspect something interesting is happening and adults are withholding information. "Dad, where are we going?" He pulled into traffic. He kept his eyes on the road. "We're going to a lake house, for the weekend, with my boss." A pause. "Your scary boss." "She's not scary." "Mateo's dad says she's scary. He said she made a building manager cry." "Mateo's dad doesn't know her." Another pause, longer this time, while Lucy processed this. "Does she have kids?" "No." "Does she have a dog?" "I don't know." "Does she know my name?" He glanced at her. "Yeah, she knows your name." Lucy absorbed this with the gravity it deserved. Then, "Does she have a pool?" "Lake house, so probably a lake." Her face lit up like sunrise. "A lake. You're going to need a jacket. And don't mention the lake to her right away. Give it like 5 minutes." Lucy was already unzipping her backpack to find her swimsuit. Claire's car was a dark green SUV that was clean to a degree Daniel had never personally achieved in any vehicle he'd ever owned. She was waiting at the curb outside the Whitmore development main office when he pulled up behind her. She'd changed no blazer, dark jeans, now a navy top that made her look like a completely different person in a way he hadn't expected. She had a single bag in the back. One bag. For a weekend that apparently involved her entire family and a major investor dinner, Lucy got out of the truck, walked directly up to Claire Whitmore and said, "Hi, I'm Lucy. My dad says you know my name." Claire looked down at her. And then, and this was the part Daniel would think about later, much later, Claire crouched down so she was at eye level with Lucy and said, "I do. He talks about you sometimes at work. You lost a tooth recently." Lucy's hand flew to her mouth. "The bottom one. I lost it at lunch and I thought I swallowed it, but I didn't. I found it in my sandwich." "That must have been exciting." "It was terrifying," Lucy said solemnly. "I thought I was going to digest it." Claire laughed. Not a polite laugh, an actual one, surprised out of her. Daniel watched it happen and filed it away without quite knowing where. They took Claire's car. Daniel offered to drive, she declined, and he let it go. Lucy sat in the back and peppered Claire with questions for approximately 20 minutes before falling asleep against the window, her breath fogging a small circle on the glass. The first 40 miles were mostly quiet. Daniel kept his eyes on the road outside the passenger window, the city giving way to suburbs giving way to the scrubby open stretch of highway that led north. "Thank you," Claire said, "for coming." "Don't thank me yet. I don't know your family." "That makes two of us some days." He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the road. "The brother Grant. He's going to have a problem with this." "Yes." "The ex-Richard. He'll be worse." "How worse?" She was quiet for a moment. "Richard Hale is the kind of man who has never been told no in a way that's stuck. He decided 6 years ago that I was part of his long-term plan. He hasn't entirely revised that. Even though you ended it." "Even though I ended it." Daniel looked at his window again. "And the grandmother." Something shifted in Claire's voice, just slightly, like a key sliding into a lock. "Margaret is the only person in my family who has ever just been interested in me. Not the company, not the next deal. Just me. She's the reason I care about any of this." "Then why did you lie to her?" A pause. "Because she worries, and because she's 76 and this year she's been sick and I didn't want her to think I was—" She stopped, started again. "She asked me once if I was lonely. I told her I was seeing someone. I don't know why I said it. I wasn't thinking about the future consequences of it. But then the consequences showed up, every weekend. A brief, exhausted exhale that sounded entirely human. She calls. She asks how he's doing. She asks if I'm happy. And every week I said yes, and every week she said she couldn't wait to meet him and eventually it was this weekend." "Yes." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Why me, honestly? You could have hired someone for this." She glanced at him, then back to the road. "Because someone hired is someone with leverage. They know what you're doing. You can't unsay it. I don't want anyone to have that. And I won't. You already signed an NDA as part of your employment contract. Legally, you're covered. But that's not why." She paused. "You're honest, Daniel. Uncomfortably honest. You told me once in a meeting about the Riverside properties that the structural inspection report we were relying on was wrong, and you'd put it in writing if I wanted, and you'd be happy to find another position if that made things difficult." He remembered that. He'd stood in a conference room full of executives and told the CEO her property development was resting on a flawed report. He'd kept his voice steady. He'd meant every word. "You approved the reinspection." "Yes, because you were right. And because you weren't afraid to say it." She looked at him again. "That's what I need this weekend. Someone who isn't afraid." In the back seat, Lucy made a small sleep sound and shifted against the door. They drove north into the dark. Tatag. The lake house appeared at the end of a long, cedar-lined driveway, lit from the inside with warm light spilling from the windows, and Daniel's first thought was, "That's not a lake house. That's a compound." It was enormous. 3 stories of cedar and glass, set back from a private dock, with a boathouse off to one side, and a catered event tent already set up on the back lawn, where a birthday dinner would apparently happen the following night. Cars lined the circular drive, expensive ones, the kind with badges Daniel recognized without personally aspiring to own. A golden retriever he'd later learn was named Maxwell ran 3 circles around their car before anyone could get out. Lucy was awake by the time they parked, and the dog resolved whatever nervousness she might have felt about the situation entirely. She tumbled out of the back seat and immediately sat on the gravel and let Maxwell investigate her with maximum enthusiasm. Claire stood beside the car, her single bag over one shoulder, and looked at the house with an expression Daniel couldn't read. Not reluctance, not dread. Something more complicated than either of those. "You okay?" he asked. She looked at him like the question surprised her. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "I look exactly fine." "You look like someone about to walk into a thing they're not sure they want to walk into." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "My grandmother is going to love you. My brother is going to hate you. My mother will be cordial and distant. Richard will try to make you feel small. And you? What are you going to do?" She picked up her bag. "I'm going to try to get through the weekend." "Great pep talk," he said. "Very inspiring." She almost smiled. Almost. Don't push it, Mercer. They walked toward the house together. Lucy abandoned the dog long enough to grab Daniel's hand, the left one, the way she always did, because her right hand was usually occupied with something, and then reached up and grabbed Claire's hand on the other side. Claire went still for just a half second. Then she let Lucy hold her hand, and they walked up the porch steps. Like that, the three of them into the warm light and noise of the Whitmore family weekend. Margaret Whitmore came around the corner of the hallway when they were barely through the door, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who'd been told by 3 doctors to slow down and had listened to approximately none of them. She was small and sharp-eyed and white-haired, and she looked at Claire with the particular exhausted love of someone who has been waiting longer than she should have had to wait. Then she looked at Daniel. Then she looked down at Lucy, and her face did something complicated and warm that Daniel would later understand was recognition not of them specifically, but of something she'd been hoping to see. "You must be Lucy," she said. "I am. Are you the grandma?" "I am the grandma." "I like your house. Is that your dog?" "Maxwell belongs to himself, but he lives here. He tried to eat my sleeve. He tries to eat everything. He's enthusiastic." Margaret straightened up and looked at Daniel with clear, direct eyes that reminded him startlingly of Claire. "And you're Daniel?" "Yes, ma'am." "Claire says you fix things." "That's most of it, yes." "Good. There's a screen door in the back that's been sticking since March, and my son-in-law says he'll get to it every time I mention it, which means he won't." "I'll look at it tomorrow." She nodded once satisfied, like they'd concluded a business deal. Then she put her hand very briefly on his arm, just for a second, the lightest touch, and leaned up slightly toward Claire. "He has kind eyes." Claire said nothing. Margaret turned back to the hallway. "Come in, all of you. Dinner was an hour ago, but there's food. Lucy, do you like cornbread?" "I've never had it." "Then tonight's your lucky night." Lucy followed her immediately, and without hesitation, Maxwell reappearing from somewhere to trot alongside her. Claire watched them go. Daniel watched Claire. "She's something," he said quietly. "She's everything," Claire said. And then she walked inside. Grant Whitmore found them 20 minutes later in the kitchen. He was taller than Daniel, which Daniel noticed because he was 6'1", and didn't often have to notice with the kind of jaw and posture that came from decades of knowing you'd never be the one asked to leave a room. He wore a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly grocery budget, and he walked in with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been to a lake house he didn't own. He stopped when he saw Daniel. He looked at him for exactly long enough that the look became something. Then he looked at Claire. "This is him, Grant. You're dating an employee." He said it like he was asking if she'd started eating gas station sushi. Not angry exactly, more baffled. The kind of baffled that comes from encountering something your framework doesn't have a category for. Daniel set down his coffee mug on the counter. He didn't say anything. Claire looked at her brother. "No," she said. "I'm dating Daniel." Grant looked back at Daniel with the specific assessment of someone running numbers. Age, clothes, hands, the way he stood. "What do you do?" "Property maintenance and operations. Senior supervisor for about 60 buildings in the metro area. Before that, crew work. Before that, Army, Maintenance Corps." Grant absorbed this. "Married." Daniel kept his voice level. "Not anymore." "Divorced?" "No." A pause while Grant figured out what that meant. "Oh." A recalibration. The bafflement smoothed into something that wanted to look like sympathy, and mostly looked like pity. "I see. How old is your daughter?" 7. "And she's here because she's mine," Daniel said very simply. "She goes where I go." Grant opened his mouth. Then he looked at Claire, who was watching him with the particular Claire Whitmore expression that Daniel had learned in 6 years, meant choose your next words with the understanding that I will remember them. Grant closed his mouth. Then he said, "Well, there's wine on the porch if you want." He left. Daniel picked up his coffee mug. He looked at Claire. She was still looking at the doorway where her brother had been standing. "You okay?" he asked. She turned. Something in her face had hardened, but underneath it was something that wasn't quite hurt. Something more like old disappointment that had calcified into armor. "I'm fine." "You said that before." "I'm consistently fine." "Right." He looked toward the porch. "There's wine on the porch." She exhaled. The armor shifted slightly. "There is." "Let's go get some." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully parse. Then she said, "You didn't argue with him." "About what?" "He was dismissive, to your face." "I know." "You didn't say anything." "He didn't say anything worth answering." He set his mug in the sink. "He's your brother, and it's your grandmother's birthday. There'll be enough time for conversations that matter. That wasn't one of them." She was quiet for a moment. "Come on," he said. "Wine." He walked toward the porch, and after a second, he heard her follow him. Her footsteps quiet on the hardwood, and when they stepped outside into the night air with the lake spread out below the dock, black and glittering under a sky that was doing the absolute most with its stars. Claire Whitmore stood beside him and looked out at the water, and for the first time since he'd met her at that utility room door, she looked like she was somewhere she wanted to be. Lucy ended up spending an hour in the kitchen with Margaret learning about cornbread and then eating 2 pieces and asking if she could have a third, to which Margaret said yes, without hesitation, which Daniel caught from across the room and filed away under reasons he was glad he'd come. They put Lucy to bed in the small room off the main upstairs hall at 9 o'clock. She'd been asleep before Daniel finished the 3rd page of the chapter they were halfway through. He sat for a moment in the chair by the window and listened to her breathe, and looked out at the black water reflecting the dock lights, and thought about the fact that tomorrow he was going to have to hold Claire Whitmore's hand in front of people who mattered to her. That was a strange thing to contemplate. He'd shaken her hand exactly twice, once when he was promoted to senior supervisor, and once at the end of a long meeting where he'd made her change her mind about something, and she'd acknowledged it with a formal handshake that he'd analyzed for approximately 0 seconds at the time and was now bizarrely thinking about. He looked at his hands in the low light of the bedroom. Worker's hands, scarred in 3 places. One knuckle that hadn't healed quite right from an accident with a pipe junction 2 years ago. A callus on his right palm that had been there so long it was just part of the hand now. "You're dating an employee." Grant had said it like it was the most unlikely thing in the world. Daniel figured he wasn't wrong. He stood up, went back to his own room across the hall, and lay down on a bed that was significantly better than his bed at home, and looked at the ceiling and told himself to go to sleep. He was still awake an hour later when he heard footsteps on the dock below. He went to the window. The dock light was on. Claire was sitting at the end of it, her arms around her knees looking at the water. She'd changed into something less formal, a worn college sweatshirt and dark sweatpants, her hair down. She looked 23 years old and nothing like anyone's CEO. Daniel stood at the window and watched her for a moment. Then he went back to bed. He told himself it wasn't his business. He was almost able to believe it. They made it through that first night without incident. The family's dinner conversations had wrapped up before Daniel and Claire came back inside, and the house had settled into nighttime sounds. The creak of old cedar, the distant lap of the lake, the occasional sound of Maxwell investigating things in the yard. But before Daniel finally fell asleep, he heard something else. A knock at his door. Quiet, tentative. He sat up. "Yeah." The door opened 3 inches. Lucy's face appeared in the gap. "Dad, I can hear the lake from my window." "I know. That's a good sound." "It sounds like something breathing." "Go back to sleep, Luke." A pause. "Is Claire nice?" He thought about her sitting on the dock in a college sweatshirt. "Yeah," he said. "She's nice." "Okay." The door started to close. Then, "She smells like cedar and something else." "Go to bed." "I'm just saying, for information purposes." The door closed. Daniel lay back down. 1 day down. 1 day and 2 nights to go. He had no idea how wrong that math was about to get. He had no idea that by the time Sunday morning came, by the time he woke up with Lucy shaking his shoulder and pointing at his left hand with wide, frightened eyes, everything he thought he knew about this weekend, This woman, this life he'd built so carefully on the principle of needing. No one would be sitting on a table between them, heavy in gold and impossible to ignore. But that was still hours away. For now, the lake breathed through the window. And Daniel Mercer, for the first time in years, let himself sleep without an alarm set. Daniel woke up Saturday morning to the smell of something burning. Not smoke. Not an emergency. Just coffee pushed past the point of return by someone who didn't understand that a coffee maker needed attention after the first cycle. He lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house's distant voices somewhere downstairs. Maxwell's nails on hardwood, the particular high-pitched laugh that meant Lucy was already awake and had found someone to talk to. And then he got up, pulled on a flannel over his undershirt, and went downstairs. Claire was standing in the kitchen holding a coffee mug and looking at the pot with the expression of someone who had ordered a subordinate to make coffee, and the subordinate had failed catastrophically. "How long has that been sitting?" "I don't know. I made it when I woke up." "When did you wake up?" 5:30. He looked at the clock on the microwave. 7:14. He walked past her, poured the dead coffee down the drain, rinsed the pot, and started over. She watched him do this without comment. "You woke up at 5:30, he said. "I always wake up at 5:30. On a Saturday. Every day." He measured out the grounds. "You should sleep more." "I should do a lot of things." "Okay. Are you going to tell me what they are?" "No. I've known you for 48 hours socially. I don't have that kind of confidence yet." She made a sound that was close to a laugh. He didn't look up. He finished setting up the pot and pressed the button, and then turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at her properly for the first time that morning. She was wearing the sweatshirt again, the worn college one. Her hair was down, and there were shadows under her eyes that told him she hadn't slept nearly enough, which tracked with 5:30 and a dock lit up at midnight. He thought like someone who spent enormous amounts of energy managing how people saw her, and had temporarily run out of the reserves for it. "Where's Lucy?" he asked. "Your daughter discovered the back porch approximately 40 minutes ago and has been sitting out there with Margaret ever since. Maxwell is also there. I believe they are having a formal council." "About what?" "Dogs mostly, and whether fish can dream." Daniel processed this. "Margaret's already awake." "Margaret is always already awake. She told me this morning that sleep is for people with quiet consciences." A brief pause. She said it while looking directly at Grant. "I'm starting to like your grandmother." "Everyone does. It's very annoying." He almost said something about why people who are that easy to love must make you feel like you're doing something wrong when you can't reach them. He almost said it. He didn't. It was too early and too true, and he didn't know Claire Whitmore well enough to say true things that might land somewhere tender. The coffee finished. He poured 2 mugs, handed her one. Their fingers didn't quite touch on the exchange. "What's the plan today?" he asked. "The birthday dinner is tonight, catered on the back lawn, formal enough to matter. This afternoon there'll be..." She paused. "There will be boats." "You don't like boats." "I like boats fine. I don't like who will be on them." "Richard." "Richard." She took a sip of coffee. Her eyes closed briefly. Then they opened again, and she looked at him with something that was either gratitude or surprise, he couldn't tell which. "This is better. It's coffee. It's not complicated." "You'd be surprised." He looked at her for a moment. "Did you sleep at all?" "Some." "How much is some?" "Enough to function." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I'm giving you." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "I was watching the water. I think better near water." "What were you thinking about?" She looked at him over the rim of the mug, long enough that he wondered if he'd asked something he shouldn't have. "How many more years I can do this?" she said finally. "The family weekend, the performance, showing up here and trying to be the version of myself they expect, and coming home on Sunday feeling like I've run a race I didn't sign up for." Daniel was quiet. "That probably sounds ungrateful," she said. "It sounds human." She looked at him like the word landed somewhere unexpected. Then she looked down at her coffee, and they stood there in the kitchen while the house came slowly awake around them, And Daniel thought she's been alone with all of this for a very long time. He didn't say that either, but he thought it. Outside, Lucy's voice carried through the porch window. She was explaining something to Margaret with great urgency and significant hand gestures, and Margaret's low, warm laughter followed whatever it was, and Daniel watched Claire turn her head toward the sound. He watched her face go soft in a way he'd never seen across a conference table. He filed that away too. The screen door was in the back hallway off the kitchen, and Daniel found it before breakfast, ran his hand along the frame. Identified the problem in about 45 seconds. Warped wood from humidity. The hinge screws backing out on the left side, and went looking for tools. He found a basic kit in the mudroom closet, which had everything he needed except a proper hinge setting bit. He made do with what was there. He was a third of the way through the repair when he heard the soft, careful footsteps that he already associated with Margaret. She came and stood in the doorway of the back hall and watched him work. He kept working. He'd learned early that some people needed you to acknowledge them, and some people just needed to be in the room for a minute. He waited to see which one Margaret was. "You looked for the tools yourself," she said. "You didn't ask where they were." "Mudroom closet. Makes sense. My husband always checked the mudroom first, too." She moved into the hallway and sat on the small bench that lived there, the kind that had been in hallways of old houses for generations, put there for the specific purpose of sitting and watching someone else do something useful. He could fix anything. He said it was just a matter of caring enough to figure it out. He wasn't wrong. He rarely was. Deeply irritating. But her voice was warm. "How long have you been doing this?" "Maintenance." He worked the screw, felt the hinge seat properly. "Since I was about 22. Started doing it for a small rental company after I got out of the army. Found out I liked it." "Why?" He thought about it. Finished the first hinge, moved to the second. "Because when something's broken, you can tell. And when you fix it, you can tell that too. Not a lot of things in life are that clear." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Claire's father, my son, was never good with his hands. He's very good with numbers, contracts, strategy. He built the company. But he was always distant, I suppose is the word. Present without being there." She paused. Claire learned to do the same. Daniel kept working. He understood he was being told something. He didn't interrupt it. "She runs that company like it's the only thing in her life," Margaret continued. "Because for a long time it was. After Richard, she just—" A small pause. "Closed. Like a window you latch against the cold. Sensible for the winter. Not so sensible when spring comes and you've forgotten the latch is still on." He tested the door. It swung cleanly. He closed and reopened it twice. Smooth. "Fixed," he said. Margaret looked at the door. Then she looked at him. "Yes, I can see that." He started collecting the tools. "She didn't tell me much about Richard, just that the family thought it was a good match." "Good match." Margaret made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a dismissal. "Good for business. Good for 2 family balance sheets. Good for a firm handshake at the end of a board meeting. Richard is the kind of man who evaluates people the way he evaluates assets." Claire understood that eventually. It just took longer than it should have because she was 23 and her father approved of him and she wanted— Margaret stopped, looked at her hands. She just wanted someone to approve of her is all. That's not a complicated thing to want. Daniel was quiet. "She talks about your daughter," Margaret said, and the pivot was so sudden and gentle at the same time that Daniel almost missed it. "So I've gathered. She talked about you before Lucy, actually. She'd mentioned something you'd said in a meeting just in passing. I didn't think anything of it at first. Then it became a pattern. And then she started telling me about Lucy, and I thought—" Margaret folded her hands in her lap. "I thought that's someone she's letting herself see." Daniel put the last tool back in the kit. He didn't know what to do with what Margaret was telling him, but he understood it was given honestly, and so he received it honestly. It's more complicated than it looks from the outside. Most real things are. She's my employer. I know what she is. Margaret stood up from the bench slowly, with the particular dignity of a woman who refused to let her body have the last word. "I'm telling you what I see. What you do with that is your own business." She moved to the door and opened it, swung clean and easy the way it should, and paused. Breakfast in 20 minutes. Lucy wants to know if there's a rule against having dessert before eggs. There absolutely is. I thought so. I told her we'd have to ask you. She said, and I'm quoting, "Dad always says that, but there's no actual rule written anywhere." She's not wrong, but the answer is still no. Margaret smiled. It was the kind of smile that had seen decades of everything, and still found the small moments worth it. She walked back toward the kitchen, and Daniel stood in the hallway for a moment longer, the toolkit in his hand, looking at the door that swung clean now. A window you latch against the cold. He put the tools away and went to get his daughter for breakfast. Breakfast was loud, in the way that large family gatherings are always loud. Too many people with too many specific opinions about food, coffee weather, and what the afternoon should look like. Claire's mother, Patricia, arrived at the table exactly when she said she would, with the composed punctuality of someone who had spent 50 years organizing herself around other people's expectations. She was warm to Daniel in the precise, calibrated way of someone reserving judgment without showing it. "Claire speaks highly of you," Patricia said over eggs. "She's generous," Daniel said. Patricia smiled the smile of a woman who knew exactly what was happening at her table and was going to watch it play out before drawing any conclusions. Grant was there too, at the far end of the table with a newspaper folded in front of him that he wasn't reading. He looked at Daniel periodically, the way people look at math they can't quite solve, not hostile exactly. More like the problem irritated him. Richard arrived at 10. Daniel heard him before he saw him. Heard the particular quality of silence that dropped over the table when the back door opened. The way conversation found a lower register and people adjusted in their chairs. He heard Lucy whisper, "Who's that?" to Margaret. And Margaret murmur something back. And then Richard Hale walked into the dining room, and Daniel had his first look at the man. Tall. Put together. The kind of handsome that came from very good genes, and the resources to maintain them. Dark hair. Silvering at the temples, in a way that a certain kind of man cultivated on purpose. A jaw like a magazine cover. A suit that was wrong for a lakehouse morning, and worn anyway, because Richard Hale had probably decided years ago that he was always dressed correctly for any room he entered. He looked at the table. He looked at Claire. Something moved in his face that Daniel couldn't fully name, familiar, proprietary, the expression of a man revisiting territory he still considered his. Then he looked at Daniel. "You must be the boyfriend." He said it with a smile, the kind of smile that was shaped correctly and entirely empty. Daniel looked at him steadily. Daniel Mercer. Richard Hale. He reached across the table and shook Daniel's hand with the specific grip of someone who used handshakes as information. Daniel matched it, held it, let go. "Claire talks about you. She just told me the same thing about you." A brief pause. The smile stayed exactly where it was. "Has she? Well." He looked at Claire, who was looking at her orange juice with the specific interest of someone who had decided that orange juice was the most important thing in the room. "All good things, I hope." She didn't specify. Richard laughed, short, polished, designed to indicate that he was the kind of man who could laugh at anything. He sat down. He reached for the coffee. And the morning proceeded. The way mornings at family lake houses do, all the ordinary machinery of meals and cleaning up, and someone spilling something, and someone else complaining about the weather. While underneath all of it, the real conversation happened in glances and silences, and the specific weight of words chosen carefully. Daniel ate his eggs. He watched Richard watch Claire. He watched Claire not watch Richard. He watched Lucy systematically charm every person at the table, except Richard, because Lucy had the specific, unerring radar of a child who could detect when an adult was performing warmth rather than feeling it. When Richard leaned over and said to Lucy, "So how do you like the lake house?" in the voice adults use when they don't actually talk to children very often. Lucy looked at him with her full considering gaze and said, "It's nice." Margaret fixed the cornbread situation. "What cornbread situation?" "The not having any situation. It's resolved now." Richard laughed his polished laugh. Lucy did not laugh back. She looked at Daniel, and then she looked at Claire, and then she went back to her eggs, and Daniel saw the corner of Claire's mouth Do something that was absolutely a suppressed smile. That small thing, that tiny, suppressed, unguarded smile, was the first time Daniel realized that the weekend was already doing something he hadn't planned for. The boats went out at 2 in the afternoon. Daniel didn't particularly want to be on a boat. He was fine with water. The lake was objectively beautiful, all blue-gray depths and cattails along the far bank, the kind of water that looked like it had been there since before the road was built. But he'd spent enough time around wealthy people's leisure activities to know that boats were often less about the water and more about the people on them. This one was no exception. It was a large pontoon, the kind that could hold 12 people easily, with padded bench seating and a small cooler Richard had stocked with things Daniel didn't recognize but assumed were expensive. Grant drove. Claire sat near the back. Daniel sat beside her because that was the role, and Lucy sat directly in front of them, with Margaret looking at the water with an expression of complete and total wonder that made Daniel feel something behind his sternum. Richard sat across from them. For the first half hour, it was fine. Margaret pointed out landmarks, a particular bend in the shoreline where she and her husband used to fish a tree that had fallen into the water 20 years ago and was still there, a specific quality of light in the late afternoon that she called her favorite thing about the lake. Then Richard started. It was subtle at first, the kind of subtle that requires intelligence to execute and requires experience to recognize. Daniel, what's your background exactly? Claire mentioned maintenance work. Senior supervisor. I manage operations for about 60 properties in the metro area. Good steady work. Said the way you'd say nice enough for what it is. Did you go to school for that or? Army, then work, learning. A pause. Good for you. Honestly. Skilled trades are there's real value in that. People forget. Daniel waited. He'd been around people like Richard before. They always looped back. And you're doing that on your own, raising your daughter, I mean, juggling all of it. People do harder things. Sure. Richard leaned back easy, relaxed, a man completely comfortable in his own narrative. I just mean it's a lot. Single parent demanding job, no real. I mean the salary range for property management, it's not. He waved his hand. I just wonder sometimes if that kind of stretched life limits what a person can do with their broader ambitions. If you have them. The water moved under the boat. Daniel looked at Richard. He kept his face even. He kept his voice level. He thought about Lucy watching this, and Margaret watching this, and Claire sitting 6 inches to his left. I have ambitions, Daniel said. They're mine, so they match my life. Of course. And Lucy doesn't limit anything, she clarifies things. Sure, Richard smiled. I just mean, I heard what you meant. Silence. The boat rocked slightly. Grant kept his eyes on the water ahead. Patricia looked at her hands. Then Richard looked at Claire. And he shifted, and the subtlety was gone now, replaced by something more direct, more precise. It's interesting, though. Claire's always been a pause. Specific about what she wants, in everything. Partners, investments, the company. She's very clear about what belongs in her life and what's... He tilted his head slightly. Adjacent to it. Claire put her sunglasses on. She looked at the water. We all experiment, Richard continued. With different... Stop, Claire said. The word was quiet, not loud, not angry in any performed way, just final. The single word equivalent of a door that has been closed and will not be reopened from the outside. Richard looked at her. You're suggesting that Daniel is an experiment, that I'm trying something that doesn't belong in my actual life. She turned her head and looked at Richard directly, her sunglasses making her expression difficult to read, but her voice making it perfectly clear. You've been doing it since breakfast. In small, deniable ways, because that's what you do, you undermine things without fingerprints. You did it with 2 of my VPs when you thought they were making me too independent of your family's investment. I recognized the pattern then. I recognize it now. Silence on the boat. Even the water seemed quieter. Daniel built more of his life with his own hands than anyone sitting on this boat. She said it cleanly, without heat, as simple statement of fact. Including me. So whatever point you're building toward, recalibrate. She looked back at the water. Richard didn't say anything else. Grant made a small sound that might have been a cough and turned the boat toward the near shore. Lucy, who had been watching all of this from the seat in front, with the complete attention of a child who understands more than adults assume, turned back to Daniel and patted his knee once. Just once. The way she did when she thought he needed to know someone was on his side. He covered her hand with his for a second. Claire saw it. She was looking at the water, but he knew she saw it. Back on the dock an hour later with the boats tied and the afternoon going gold around the edges, Daniel stood at the end of the dock, watching the light change on the water. He heard footsteps behind him. He didn't turn around. "You could have said something," Claire said. "On the boat." "You didn't need me to." "That's not the point. It was directed at you." "I know what it was directed at." He turned. She'd taken off the sunglasses and was holding them in one hand, and in the late afternoon light without the business armor and without the performance. She kept dialed to 11 at the office. She looked not softer exactly, more real. "You handled it. It didn't need both of us handling it." She looked at him for a moment. "He's going to keep doing it." "I know. He'll be more direct tonight." "That's his mistake." She exhaled. She looked back at the dock. "Why didn't it bother you more what he said? About my salary and my ambitions and my stretched life?" Yes. Daniel thought about it. He thought about Lucy, who had patted his knee on the boat. He thought about the apartment, the grocery store with the dented carts, Rosa calling him honey, the water heater he'd fixed on Friday. That was already part of his past, the same way everything he fixed became part of his past, done, moved on from someone else's comfort now. "Because I know what I've got." "I'm not sure he does." Claire was quiet for long enough that Daniel looked at her again to check. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her yet. Not calculating, not composed, not the ice queen the employees whispered about. Something more like the person you'd be if you'd never had to be anything specific. "I ended my engagement to Richard," she said, 6 years ago. "I know." "You know what I told him when I did it?" "No, nothing." She said it flatly. "I gave him a letter, because I knew if I was in the same room with him, he'd talk me back into it. He'd make the strategic case and the practical case and the case about family and company synergy and about how my feelings were temporary and my choices permanent, and I was 23. I'd spent my whole life being told that the right decision and the comfortable decision were the same thing." She paused. "They weren't. So I wrote a letter and I left it on his desk and I didn't answer calls for 3 weeks. Daniel was quiet. "My father didn't speak to me for a month," she said. "Grant thought I'd lost my mind. My mother thought I was being romantic in a way that would cost me." A pause. "Margaret sent me a card. She wrote, 'You already know what you want. Trust it.'" "What did you want?" She looked at the water. "At 23, I wanted someone who looked at me and saw me. Not the company, not the inheritance, not the match." She was quiet for a moment. "I stopped wanting it eventually. It seemed impractical. Wanting to be seen. Wanting it badly enough to look for it." Daniel looked at the dock between their feet. "That's the part they don't put in the brochure about being good at business. You get good at functioning without things." She looked at him sideways. "Is that what happened with you after your wife?" "She wasn't my wife." He said it without bitterness, just accurate. "We were together 4 years. She left when Lucy was 8 months old, packed while I was at work, left a note on the counter." "Daniel." "She wasn't bad. She just didn't want the life we were in and she knew it and I didn't. That's..." He exhaled. "That's a hard thing to know about yourself. I don't hold it against her. You don't hold anything against anyone. I hold things. I just don't advertise them." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you hold?" "I thought about it." The lake was going copper now, the light doing something with the surface that looked almost deliberate. "Mostly." He stopped, started again. I spent a couple years thinking if I could make things comfortable enough, reliable enough, that's what kept people. Stability. Structure. He looked at his hands on the railing. Then I realized I was building a house for people instead of a life with them. Different thing. Claire looked at him steadily. What did you do with that realization? Stopped dating, he said simply. Raised Lucy. Got better at my job. Built a life that was good enough for two and left room for a third if it ever made sense. Has it ever made sense? Hasn't yet. The quiet between them was the kind that meant something. I keep the company because it's mine, she said finally, not quite answering anything he'd asked. Not because my father built it, because I rebuilt it after he handed me something broken and expected me to be grateful for the complication. It took me 4 years and 2 restructurings and losing 7 executives who thought the new CEO was temporary. She paused. And now it's mine. And Richard's investment group could make it larger, or I could keep it the size. I can actually see the size where I know the names of my senior supervisors and what they're fixing on a Friday afternoon and whether their daughters lost their teeth in a sandwich. She said it without looking at him. He said nothing. I'm not good at... She stopped. Started again. I've built every significant thing in my life alone. That's not virtue. It's what happens when you decide asking for help is a structural weakness. It's not. I know. Then why keep deciding it? She turned and looked at him fully. The same reason you spent 3 years building comfort instead of connection. Because the thing that protects you becomes the thing you don't know how to live without. The light went all the way to copper and started toward gold. Behind them on the lawn, Margaret probably had turned on the porch lights early, and the warm yellow fell across the dock. Daniel looked at her. She looked back at him. Something was present between them that had been building since a utility room on a Friday afternoon, and neither of them had named yet. We should go help with dinner, he said. We should. Neither of them moved for another 10 seconds. Then Lucy's voice came from the lawn. Dad, Margaret says there's fireflies coming later. Can I stay up? And the moment reorganized itself back into something manageable. Yes, he called back. He stepped back from the railing. He looked at Claire one more time. She was looking at the water like she was committing something to memory. He walked back up the dock toward his daughter's voice, and after a moment, he heard her follow him, and the porch light fell across both of them as they reached the lawn. And if Margaret was watching from the kitchen window, which she absolutely was, she said nothing about it. The birthday dinner was everything. A wealthy family's catered lakeside event would be linen tablecloths, candles, good wine food brought by a catering company that did not need to be asked anything twice. Old family photographs arranged on a side table along the sort of timeline that made you understand how long a family had been a family. Daniel wore his good button-down. Lucy wore her best dress, the navy one with the white collar that she'd picked herself last spring and wore to every formal occasion because she had strong opinions about formal occasions. Claire arrived in a simple dark green dress, no jewelry, except small earrings, and when she came out of her room and walked down the stairs, and Daniel was standing at the bottom of them, he didn't say anything for a second. Then he said, "Green suits you," and she said, "Don't make it weird," and he said, "That's the least weird thing I could have said," and she almost smiled, and they went in to dinner. Margaret sat at the head of the table. She wore a cream silk blouse and her late husband's watch, and she looked. Daniel thought exactly like someone who had been the center of gravity for a large family for many decades, and was neither tired of it nor in need of anyone's acknowledgement of it. She simply was the center. The table organized itself around her without discussion. Dinner was good. The food was good. The conversation was most of it good. Patricia asked Daniel questions about the metro area properties in a way that suggested genuine curiosity, and also he suspected a quiet due diligence. Grant was quieter than the morning, though Daniel caught him watching with less hostility and more something else. Reconsideration, maybe. Grant looked like a man updating a spreadsheet. Richard watched Claire, and Claire, without discussion, without arrangement, without Daniel doing anything except being present, kept reaching for him across the invisible line between their chairs. Not dramatically, just her hand on the table near his. her shoulder tilting slightly toward him when something was said. Her eyes finding his when something needed to be confirmed between two people who were in something together. It didn't feel like performance. He wasn't sure when it had stopped. There was a moment near the end of the main course when Richard made a comment about Daniel's work framed as a compliment, sharpened underneath it. Something about the hands-on nature of his role being admirable for what it is, and the charm of a simpler approach to life. And Daniel felt Claire's hand move. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. She didn't say anything immediately. Then she looked at Richard. "Grant, do you remember what Dad used to say about the Meridian acquisition? The one everyone said was too hands-on, too direct, not sophisticated enough for the portfolio." Grant looked up from his plate, clearly recalibrating. "That it returned 22% the first year." She looked back at Richard. "Daniel runs 60 properties to a standard I've watched 3 other supervisors fail to maintain. He does it because he understands the buildings and the people in them. That's not simple. That's rare." She picked up her wine. "But thank you for the observation." She didn't let go of his hand until she needed to pick up her fork. Daniel looked at his plate. He didn't look at her. He ate his dinner. Under the table, Lucy kicked his foot lightly once. He looked at her. She gave him the look. The one she'd developed somewhere around age 5 that communicated with 7-year-old precision. "I see everything, and I'm not going to say anything about it right now, but I will be bringing this up later." He gave her the look back that said, "I know you will, and we'll discuss it." She went back to her food. Across the table, Margaret watched all of this with the expression of someone witnessing something they'd suspected for a long time was possible, but hadn't been sure they'd live to see. She caught Daniel's eye. She raised her wine glass very slightly in his direction. He nodded. The music started after dinner. Someone had connected something to outdoor speakers, and Margaret made a specific request that went back decades. Something with a piano that filled the space between the trees and the water and made the night feel larger. People drifted from the table to the lawn, conversations breaking into smaller pieces, and the catering staff moved quietly between, and the candles burned down slowly. Daniel danced with Claire on the part of the lawn where the porch light reached. It wasn't planned. Margaret had danced with Grant first, the particular father-daughter dance of families that kept the forms of things even when everything beneath them had changed. And then Margaret had said something to Claire that Daniel didn't hear, and the next thing he knew, Claire was beside him, asking, not quite looking at him. "This is probably expected." "Probably. We don't have to. I know we don't have to." He turned toward her and held out his hand. She looked at it for a second. Then she put her hand in his. She was a good dancer. Not showy economical the way she was about most things, nothing wasted. She kept a proper amount of space between them at first, which was the right thing, which was the expected thing. And then, not all at once, but gradually the way a door swings on a repaired hinge, smoothly without effort, the space between them closed. She was looking past his shoulder at the water, and he was looking past hers at the porch, and neither of them addressed what was happening, which was that they had stopped pretending sometime in the last hour, and neither of them had made the announcement. "My grandmother is crying," Claire said quietly. "Happy crying. Is there a difference?" "Significant difference, yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "Happy, I think." "Then we're doing all right." Her hand, which had been placed correctly on his shoulder, moved slightly, settled the way things settle when they find the right position. He said nothing. "Richard's going to make a move tonight," she said. "Probably." "About the investment." "About more than the investment." She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were direct. A CEO's eyes, even in a green dress, even on a Saturday night. "You're not intimidated by him," she said. "No. Why not? He has 42 million reasons people find him very intimidating." "Because I watched him on that boat trying to make a 7-year-old girl feel like her dad was less than enough," Daniel said. "And I watched her not buy it for a second." He looked at her steadily. "He needs people to feel small for his confidence to feel big. That's not power. That's a leak in the foundation." She stared at him. He wasn't sure if he'd said too much. He held her gaze and didn't take it back. "You say things like that, she said quietly, like they cost you nothing. Because they don't. They're just true. She was quiet. They kept moving. The music went somewhere slower, and the candles did what candles do when the night gets deep enough. I don't want Monday to come, she said. So quiet he almost missed it. He tightened his hand just slightly on hers. Neither do I, he said. They danced until the song ended. Then they stood there for one more second, neither moving. Then Lucy appeared at his elbow. She'd been awake longer than was advisable, running on cornbread and excitement and the specific voltage of a summer night that knew it was a summer night, and she pushed between them without ceremony and said, Margaret says there's pie. There's always pie at these things, Daniel said. She made it herself, this morning. She says store pie is what you serve people you don't care about. Margaret is my kind of woman. I know I told her. Lucy grabbed his hand. Then she looked at Claire. Then she grabbed Claire's hand too, and towed them both toward the porch, and Margaret was in the doorway, with the door open and the kitchen light behind her, and she looked at the three of them crossing the lawn together, and she said nothing. Her face said everything. Lucy talked Margaret into letting her stay up for one more piece of pie, and then fell asleep against Margaret's shoulder at the kitchen table, her head tipped sideways, her hand still loosely holding a fork. Daniel carried her up the stairs carefully, her dead weight sleep warmth. Familiar in the way that Lucy's weight had always been familiar, the specific gravity of the person you'd carry anywhere. He put her down in the small room, tucked the blanket up, and stood for a moment. She looked peaceful in the way that children look peaceful when the world is good enough. He brushed her hair back once from her forehead. Then he heard from downstairs the front door. And two voices, Richard's and Claire's. And the particular quality of silence from the rest of the house that meant everyone else had gone to bed or was pretending to. He considered going back downstairs. He stayed where he was. He sat in the chair by Lucy's window, the small one that looked out toward the dock, and he looked at the water and he listened to the lake breathe. He didn't know how long he sat there. Long enough for the voices downstairs to stop. Long enough for the lights on the dock to go off one by one until only the safety lamp at the end remained. He was still sitting there when the door to his room across the hall clicked softly open and then closed. I didn't know why that sound. That quiet click, Claire going to bed, settled something in him. But it did. He was still in the chair when sleep found him. Outside the lake did what lakes do at the end of a night that has mattered. It held the dark carefully, and it waited for the morning, and it kept its own counsel about everything it had seen. He woke up in the chair. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the particular quality of light coming through unfamiliar curtains. The sound of water that wasn't a pipe or a radiator, but an actual lake doing what lakes do in the early morning. Then it settled. Lake house. Saturday night into Sunday morning. Lucy across the hall. Howe was still in his clothes from the night before. His neck had the specific complaint of a man who'd slept upright in a chair that wasn't designed for sleeping, and his left hand felt strange, heavier than it should, the way a hand feels when you've slept on it wrong, and the circulation spent the night doing something inadvisable. He flexed his fingers. Something shifted on his left hand that shouldn't have shifted. He looked down. The light was coming gray and early through the window, that particular quality of dawn light that hadn't decided yet whether it was morning or still night, and it took his eyes a second to adjust, to find the object, to understand what he was looking at. A ring. A gold ring on his left hand. On the finger where a wedding band goes. Heavy. Antique. The kind of ring that had been worn by someone for decades before it came to rest on this particular finger on this particular morning. Not new, not cheap, not something you'd buy at an airport gift shop as a joke. He stared at it. He turned his hand over slowly, the way you examine something you're not sure is real. The gold caught the early light. The band was wide plain, worked slightly smooth on the inner edge from years of wear, with a small engraving on the inside that he had to tilt toward the window to read. E&M, 1974. He sat very still in the chair for a moment. Then the door to the room opened, and Lucy came through it in her pajamas, hair going in 4 directions, carrying the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2, and she stopped in the doorway and looked at him and then looked at his hand. Her eyes went wide. "Dad." Her voice was completely serious. "Where did you get that?" "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know?" "I mean I don't know, Lucy. I woke up and it was on my hand." She crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed his hand and turned it toward the window, the same way he had, examining it with the focused attention of a 7-year-old confronting a mystery. "It's old." "I know." "It's a wedding ring." "I know." "You're not married." "I am aware of that." "Dad." She looked at him with the full weight of 7 years of watching him handle every situation calmly. "This is a big deal." "I know it's a big deal. We should find out whose it is. That's exactly what we're going to do." He stood up, joints protesting the chair in multiple ways simultaneously. "Stay here." "I'm coming with you." "Lucy." "Dad, someone put a ring on your finger while you were asleep. I'm absolutely coming with you." He looked at her. She had the expression she got when she had made a decision, and the decision was final. He'd been seeing that expression for 5 years, and he had learned the hard way twice that arguing with it cost more than accepting it. "Fine, but you stay behind me." "Obviously." They went downstairs together. The house was quiet in the specific way of a house whose occupants were mostly still asleep, the morning kitchen smell of old coffee, not yet replaced by fresh. The back porch door was open, the one with the fixed hinge, and through it, Daniel could see the dock and the lake in early light, and one figure standing at the end of the dock. Claire. Same place he'd seen her from the window on Friday night. Different morning, same instinct going to the water when she needed to think. She turned before he reached the end of the dock, like she'd heard him coming, like she'd been listening for it. She looked at him. Then she looked at his hand. And her face changed in a way Daniel had not seen it change yet over this entire weekend. Not the composure slipping, not the CEO armor cracking, but something more fundamental than either of those. Recognition, shock, and underneath both something old and tender and complicated. "That's my grandfather's ring," she said. The words came out quiet, almost careful, the way you handle something breakable. "I know it's not mine," Daniel said. "I woke up wearing it. I don't know how it got on my hand." She was looking at the ring, not at him. "He died 8 years ago. Margaret's kept it." She stopped, swallowed. "She keeps it in a box in her room. She's kept it locked since his funeral." "Then someone unlocked it." Claire looked up from the ring to his face. "She must have—" She stopped again, pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. She wouldn't. She clearly did. Behind them from the main house they heard the screen door, his repaired screen door, swinging clean and easy, open and close. Then footsteps on the dock. Multiple sets. Grant's voice came first. "Claire, Mother wants to know if—" And then he stopped, because he'd seen the ring. Patricia came around the corner of the dock, coffee in hand, and stopped beside Grant. Richard came out behind them both. The morning was doing what summer mornings do at lake houses, going from gray to gold in stages, and everyone stood in that early light and looked at the ring on Daniel's left hand, and nobody said anything for a moment. Then Richard said, "Where did you get that?" His voice was different from the dinner table Richard, different from the boat Richard. Harder. The pretense of social polish gone. This was the voice he probably used in rooms where deals died or survived. "I woke up with it on my hand," Daniel said. "That's not possible." "Nevertheless, that ring belongs to this family." Richard looked at Claire. "That's your grandfather's ring. Margaret's kept that ring locked up for—" "I know what it is, Richard." "Then why is he wearing it?" "That's what I'm trying to understand." Grant stepped forward. He looked at Daniel with an expression that was not the reconsideration Daniel had seen at dinner the night before. This was older, more reflexive. The expression of a man who'd spent his life protecting a family from outside variables and had just found one wearing his grandfather's ring. "Did you go into her room?" "No." "Daniel." "I said no. I woke up in the chair in Lucy's room at dawn with it on my finger. I don't know how it got there. I'm standing here telling you that." "That's not—" "Grant." Lucy stepped out from behind Daniel. The word from a 7-year-old in pajamas with a stuffed rabbit stopped everyone. She looked at Grant with the full-level gaze she deployed when adults were being unfair. My dad didn't steal anything. He's not a thief. He fixes things. He fixed your grandma's door yesterday for free because it needed fixing. He doesn't take things. Grant looked at his niece Daniel's daughter, and the reflexive suspicion in his face ran up against the absolute certainty in hers, and something shifted. But Richard wasn't done. This is exactly. He turned to Claire. His voice went deliberate. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you. You invite someone into this house, someone you barely know outside of a professional context and... Barely know, Claire repeated. He's your employee, Claire. Whatever this weekend has been, whatever your... Stop. He's worked his way into your grandmother's trust in 48 hours. He's charmed everyone in this house. And now he's standing on your family's dock, wearing your grandfather's wedding ring, and you're defending him before we even know how. Because I know him. Her voice was completely even. That was the thing about Claire Whitmore. Angry she didn't get louder. She got more precise. I've watched him work for 6 years. I've seen how he treats people who can't do anything for him. I've seen how he handles situations where the correct thing and the comfortable thing are different. And I've watched him spend the last 48 hours in a house full of people who had every reason to make him feel small, and he has never not once been anything other than exactly who he says he is. Richard stared at her. So when I tell you that if Daniel says he woke up with that ring on his hand, he woke up with that ring on his hand, that's not defending him without knowing. That's knowing him. The dock was silent, except for the water. Then Daniel did something none of them expected. He took the ring off. He held it for a moment in his palm, looking at it, the weight of it, the age of it, the inscription, E&M 1974. And then he walked to the small dock table where someone had left a coffee mug the night before, and he set the ring down on it. I don't know how it got there, he said. I'm telling the truth about that. But whatever the reason, a ring isn't something someone puts on your hand and makes a decision for you. That's not how this works. He looked at Claire. Lucy and I are going to pack. We'll say goodbye to Margaret properly, and then we're going home. The silence on the dock was different now. Denser. Lucy grabbed his hand. The left one. The one that had been wearing the ring. She held it tight. You don't have to go. The voice came from behind all of them. Margaret. None of them had heard her come out. She moved quietly for a woman of 76, with a doctor's orders to slow down, and she stood at the end of the dock in her robe, her white hair undone, her eyes clear and direct in the morning light. She looked at the ring on the table. She looked at Daniel. I put it there. The kitchen table held all of them 10 minutes later, not by design, but by the gravity of the thing, the way serious conversations collect people, the same way water collects in the lowest place. Margaret sat at the head. Claire sat to her left. Daniel sat across from Claire. Lucy was beside Daniel, still holding his hand, her rabbit on the table, because she'd decided this was important enough to bring him. Grant stood by the counter. Patricia sat quietly at the far end. Richard stood in the doorway, which was where he'd been since the dock arms crossed the expression of a man watching a situation go somewhere he couldn't redirect. Margaret poured herself coffee. She did it without hurrying. She did not appear to feel the urge everyone else in the room was feeling, which was either the composure of someone very old, or the composure of someone who had decided what she needed to say and was going to say it at her own pace. I found him at 2 a.m, she said. Daniel. He was asleep in the chair in the small room. He'd carried Lucy back from the main house. She fell asleep on the kitchen bench after the last of the pie, and he'd sat with her until she was settled. I walked past the room, and the door was open, and he was just... She paused, wrapped both hands around her mug. He was asleep in the chair with his head tipped back, and Lucy was in the bed, and his hand was resting on the edge of the mattress next to hers. Like he'd fallen asleep mid-reach. Nobody in the room made a sound. Edwin used to do that, Margaret said. My husband. When Claire was small, when she'd visit and have nightmares. He'd sit in the chair in her room and hold her hand through the bars of the old crib until she fell back asleep. And eventually he'd fall asleep himself, still holding on. She looked at the ring on the table. He always said, protect everyone first, yourself last. Not as a rule, just as a reflex. The way some people reach for their keys when they leave a room. He just reached for the people. She looked at Daniel. I went and got the ring, she said simply. I've had it for 8 years. I knew when I put it away that I was keeping it for something. I didn't know what. I thought someday if Claire found someone I'd know, I'd be able to tell. She looked at her granddaughter. I've watched a lot of men try to deserve you, Claire. Some of them were impressive. Some of them were powerful. Some of them were very good at performing the shape of what you were supposed to want. A brief pause. Daniel wasn't performing anything. He was just in the room, doing what needed doing, and I thought, she stopped. She picked up the ring from the table. She held it for a moment, and Daniel watched something happen in her face, a memory maybe, or something older than memory. The specific grief of holding an object that outlasted the person who wore it. I thought Edwin would have put it on his own hand, she said quietly. And so I did it for him. The kitchen was completely silent. Then Daniel said, Margaret. She looked at him. I understand why you did it. I think it's one of the most. I think what you saw in that room mattered, and I understand why it mattered. He kept his voice steady and direct, the voice he used when he had to say something true that was going to cost him something. But a ring isn't permission to decide someone else's life, not mine, not Claire's. That's not what this is. Margaret looked at him for a long time. I know, she said. I'm not saying it to correct you. I'm saying it because what you felt was real. What Edwin was to you was real. And I'm not him. Whatever I am, whatever this weekend has been, that's something different, and it needs to start from a different place. She looked at the ring in her palm. He's right, Claire said. Her voice was quiet, but there was no uncertainty in it. She was looking at her grandmother, and her eyes were wet. Not from tears that had fallen, but from tears she was choosing not to let fall, which Daniel had come to understand was its own thing entirely with Claire Whitmore. Gran, you can't. She stopped, started again softer. You can't decide this for me. Even you. Even with everything you know about what I need. Because if it comes from somewhere other than me choosing it, then I don't actually have it. I just have something that was arranged. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something that made the room shift. She looked at the ring. She set it down on the table between Daniel and Claire, equidistant in the middle space. She looked at Daniel. You said a ring isn't permission to decide someone else's life. Yes, you're right. She lifted her eyes to his. But I want you to understand something, Daniel. I'm 76. I've watched my granddaughter spend 6 years building walls so well constructed that most people don't even realize they're outside them. She glanced at Richard briefly, just a glance a second, and then back to Daniel. I didn't put that ring on your hand because I made a decision. I put it on your hand because I recognized something, and I'm old enough to know that recognition is worth naming, even when the timing is wrong. A pause. So I'm not apologizing for seeing it. I'm apologizing for the method. Daniel nodded. Margaret picked up her coffee. Grant from the counter cleared his throat. It was the sound of a man recalibrating an entire position. I owe you an apology too, he said. He was looking at Daniel with an expression that was entirely different from the cream sweater assessment of the day before. I jumped to the wrong conclusion on the dock. I shouldn't have. You were protecting your family, Daniel said. I'd have done the same. That's... Grant paused. That's a very decent response to being accused of theft. You didn't quite get to accused. You were working up to it. Grant looked at him for a second. Something pulled at the corner of his mouth. Fair. Richard pushed off from the doorway. This is... He stopped. He was looking at Claire in a way that was running out of the performance that had sustained it through the whole weekend, and what was underneath wasn't malice exactly. It was something closer to defeat, and something even closer to the specific pain of a person who understood finally that a door was closed for real this time. Claire, the investment. Not now, she said. There are 42 million reasons. Richard. Her voice wasn't unkind. It was the voice she'd used to write him a letter 6 years ago. Final clear decided. We'll have a professional conversation about the investment through the proper channels. This isn't the place, and it isn't the time. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Daniel, and then he did something that surprised Daniel. He nodded. Not graciously, not warmly, but honestly, the nod of a man who had run out of moves and knew it. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and walked out of the kitchen, and a minute later they heard his car. The room went a little quieter after that, a quieter that felt clean. Lucy, who had been silent through all of this with the focused seriousness of someone doing very important archival work, looked up at Daniel. Are we still going home? He looked at Claire. Claire looked at him. Let me think about that, he said. He found Claire 20 minutes later on the dock. Again. It was becoming their place without either of them naming it as such. The way certain places become yours, not through declaration, but through repeated return. She was sitting on the dock with her legs hanging over the edge, her feet just above the water. The morning had gone all the way to gold by now, and the lake was doing the thing with the light that Margaret had described as her favorite. He sat down beside her, not too close, not too far. For a while they didn't say anything. I'm sorry, she said finally. About the ring, Margaret, all of it. Don't be sorry for Margaret. She meant something real. She overstepped. She's 76, and she's watching people she loves live their lives sideways, and she tried to help in the wrong way. I've done that. You've probably done that. He looked at the water. Grace goes in all directions. Claire was quiet for a moment. You handled that well. In the kitchen. I didn't do anything. You took the ring off. You didn't argue, you didn't defend, you didn't make it about you. You just said the true thing and put the ring down and let it be what it was. It's not just anything. She turned and looked at him directly. Richard would have pocketed the ring and spun the story. Grant would have gotten defensive. My father would have turned it into a negotiation. You just said the true thing, and then you were done. He looked at her. The morning light was doing something with her face that he'd have to be more careful about not noticing if he was going to get back in that car on Sunday afternoon and go back to being her employee. What did Richard say to you last night? He asked. After the party. I heard you two in the hallway. She looked at the water. He told me I was making a mistake. That whatever I was doing with you was temporary. Romantic. That I'd come back around to practical eventually, and he'd rather we found our way back before I embarrassed both families in front of investors. What did you say? I told him that the company I'd built without his investment had returned better margins than the ones his family funded, and that I'd rather grow slowly in a direction I chose than quickly in a direction he approved of. That's a good answer. I've had 6 years to write it. He smiled at the water. She saw it. I didn't tell him the rest, she said. What's the rest? She was quiet for a moment. Long enough that he didn't push it. He'd learned that with Claire, silence wasn't absence of answer. It was the answer gathering itself. That I'm not doing it to prove something. That it's not romantic or temporary or an experiment with normal people. She said the last 2 words with a specific, quiet exhaustion that told him Richard's phrase from the boat had landed harder than she'd shown. That the reason I've been paying attention to a maintenance supervisor for 6 years isn't strategic, and it isn't professional, and I don't have a name for it, except that some people show you who they are in the small moments, and the small moments accumulate until they're something you can't explain away. He looked at her. She was looking at the water, but she knew he was looking at her. You said last night that you don't want Monday to come, he said. I did. I meant what I said back. I know you did. She pulled one knee up to her chest. That's what makes it complicated. Claire. He waited until she looked at him. I need to say something, and I need you to hear it as something I'm saying, because I respect you, and not because I'm pushing you away. Okay. There's a power difference between us, a real one. Not Richard's money, not the family. Just you signed the authorization for my position review. You have final say on the terms of my employment. That's real, and it lives in the same room as everything else this weekend has been, and I can't pretend it doesn't. She held his gaze. If there's anything real here. He stopped, started again. I need to know that I'm choosing you because you're Claire. Because of who you are and what you say and what you do when you think no one's watching. Not because you're the woman who controls my paycheck and saying yes feels safer than saying no. Something moved in her face. Not hurt or not only hurt. Something more like the expression of someone who has been given the thing they most needed and least expected to receive. That would hurt more, she said quietly, coming from anyone else. I know, because you're right. She looked at the water. And no one has ever said that to me. The men who've wanted to be with me, they've wanted the company, the access, the name. Or they've wanted the romantic idea of a difficult woman made accessible. Richard wanted a merger. Nobody ever told me that the way it started mattered, that arriving honestly mattered. It does. So what do we do with it? He looked at his left hand, bare now, the ring back in Margaret's keeping nothing but his own skin. I don't know yet, but I know what we don't do. We don't take it back with us and make it into something that operates inside the original equation. Boss and employee in a secret situation. That goes wrong in 20 different ways. Yes. And I'm not willing to let it go wrong. So I need to think about what makes it not wrong before I say anything else about what I want. She looked at him for a long moment. What do you want? He looked back at her steadily. I want to deserve whatever answer I give you. That means I need the ground to be level first. She was quiet for so long that Maxwell came out on the dock and pressed his nose against her knee, and she put her hand on the dog's head without looking down. I could change the reporting structure, she said. Your position. I could move your supervisory chain so you report to Marcus Webb directly with no pathway back to my desk. That would solve the professional part. Yes, but not the other part. No. She scratched behind Maxwell's ears. The other part is that I've spent 6 years making myself into someone who doesn't need anyone, and I became very good at it. And now I'm sitting on a dock with a man who fixed my grandmother's door for free and danced with me last night and took off a ring that could have changed his entire financial situation because he knew it wasn't his to wear, and I'm... She stopped. Something in her voice shifted, just slightly. The CEO composure over something that had been waiting a long time to be said. I'm not sure I know how to do this, Daniel. I'm not sure I know how to just be in something without controlling all the variables. Nobody does. You seem to. I have a 7-year-old who reorganizes every plan I make on a daily basis. That's not wisdom, that's adaptation. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, something closer. The kind of sound that happens when something hurts and is funny at the same time. I'm serious. So am I. He turned slightly toward her. You don't need to know how to do it before you do it. That's not how it works. You figure it out while you're in it. He paused. Or you don't. But you can't know in advance. She looked at him. This is probably not what you wanted to hear, he said. No, it's exactly what I needed to hear. Those aren't always the same thing. No, they aren't. The water moved under the dock. Maxwell settled down between them with a sigh that communicated deep canine satisfaction with the situation, and Claire looked down at the dog and then back at Daniel, and for the first time all weekend, she looked neither guarded nor performing. She looked like someone who had put down something heavy and was still deciding whether to pick it back up. Come back inside, she said. Margaret is going to make breakfast, and she's going to make it into a formal event, because that's what she does when she thinks something important is happening, and she wants a proper witness to it. Is something important happening? She stood up. She looked at him from standing. I think it might be. I haven't decided what to do about it yet. She reached down and offered him her hand to get up from the dock. I took it. He stood. She didn't immediately let go. Thank you, she said. For what? For taking the ring off. For not making it someone else's story. He looked at her hand in his. It's a good ring. It deserved to mean something real. She let go. They went back inside. Breakfast was as predicted an event. Margaret made eggs 4 ways cornbread from scratch fruit she'd sliced herself a spread for 12 served to 6, because Margaret operated on the principle that the table should always have more than enough room for whoever showed up. She moved around the kitchen with the authority of a woman who had been feeding people through hard mornings for half a century and knew that food was not about food. Grant was different at breakfast. Not entirely, he was still. Grant still the older brother who assessed everything, but something had recalibrated. He talked to Daniel about the military, asked real questions about maintenance work, asked about Lucy's school, with a genuine interest that surprised Daniel, and absolutely did not surprise Lucy, who had already decided that Grant was more interesting than he initially appeared, and had told him so at the dock, in the frank way she had of saying things that would be rude from an adult, but were simply true from a 7-year-old. She said you looked less mean in the morning light, Daniel told Grant quietly, while Margaret was in the pantry. Grant looked at the ceiling briefly. That child. I know. He paused. She's something. Yeah. Claire talks about her at work. Apparently. Grant looked at his coffee. He looked at Claire, who was at the far end of the table teaching Lucy something about the proper ratio of butter to cornbread that Lucy was taking extremely seriously. She used to talk about people, he said. When she was younger. She'd come home from school, and she'd tell you about everyone, the teachers, the kids who was funny, who was struggling. She paid attention. He turned his mug in his hands. Then Dad started bringing her into the company and He shrugged, but it was the kind of shrug that carries weight. She stopped talking about people, started talking about properties and projections and restructuring plans. He paused. I didn't think about it that way at the time. I just thought she was growing up. That's one way to put it, Daniel said. I should have pushed back more on Richard. 6 years ago. Grant looked at him directly. He was wrong for her. I knew it. I let the business case override the obvious thing. You were looking out for your family. I was taking the easiest path and calling it looking out for my family. He was quiet. Those aren't the same thing either. Daniel nodded. She's different this weekend, Grant said. She laughed at dinner last night. Properly laughed. I haven't heard that in... He stopped. A while. She laughed at Lucy mostly. Sure, but... Grant looked at him. Something in his face settled. It's still laughing. Margaret emerged from the pantry with a jar of preserves and called everyone back to the table, and the conversation opened back up into the general noise of a family morning, and Lucy successfully negotiated an extra piece of cornbread by citing precedent from the night before, and Claire pointed out that precedent required a ruling party, and Margaret was the ruling party, and Margaret ruled in favor of the cornbread, and Grant told Lucy she'd make a good attorney, and Lucy said she was thinking about being a marine biologist or possibly a building inspector, depending on how her math improved. Daniel sat in the middle of all of it and thought I am going to have to be very careful on the drive home, because the drive home was 3 hours. And Lucy was going to ask questions. And he didn't have the answers yet. He only had the shape of where answers might eventually live if he did the necessary work to deserve them. After breakfast, while Lucy was in the yard throwing a stick for Maxwell in the committed way of a child who had decided that the dog needed more exercise than he was getting, Daniel found Margaret in the kitchen alone. He helped her with the dishes without being asked. That was how it went. He picked up a dish towel, she handed him a plate, and they worked in the comfortable rhythm of two people who didn't need to arrange the doing of a necessary thing. I owe you an apology, Margaret said. You said that already. I meant it both times. She handed him another plate. I should not have put that ring on your hand. Even if I was right about what I saw, the method was wrong. The method was wrong, he agreed. But I'm not sorry for seeing it. I know. He dried the plate. I'm not asking you to be. She handed him the last mug. He loved a woman who didn't make it easy, she said. Edwin. I was not a simple person. I had opinions about everything, and I said them, and I didn't apologize for them, and I made the man work for every inch of peace in our house. She smiled at the memory, the smile of someone very old, looking at something very far away, that is still entirely warm. He used to say that every morning with me was an adventure, and I never knew if that was a complaint or a compliment. Her voice softened. I asked him once late, much later, and he said both, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Daniel set the mug in the cabinet where it belonged. She'll make you work for it, Margaret said. I know. It'll be worth it. I know that too. Margaret turned the water off and dried her hands on the kitchen towel and looked at him with the specific directness of a woman who has outlived enough to know what matters. You said a ring isn't permission to decide someone else's life. Yes, you were right. She reached into the pocket of her robe. She held out the ring. Then take it. Don't wear it. Don't give it to anyone. Just keep it. Until you know what you want to do with it. If you ever do. She paused. And if you don't, you send it back, and we'll say no more about it. He looked at the ring in her palm. He thought about Monday morning. About the drive home. About Lucy's questions, and Claire's reporting structure, and the level ground they hadn't found yet, but were going to need. He thought about a man falling asleep in a chair still holding on. He took the ring. He put it in his shirt pocket. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me. She patted his arm once lightly the way she'd done on Friday night when he'd first walked through the door. Just be honest. With her. With yourself. The rest figures itself out. He nodded. She walked out of the kitchen. He stood for a moment, one hand over his shirt pocket, feeling the weight of the ring through the fabric. Outside. Lucy screamed with delight because Maxwell had apparently decided that the stick game now involved both of them running and neither of them stopping, and her laughter carried through the open window and filled the kitchen, and Daniel thought, this is what a good weekend sounds like. He walked outside to watch his daughter run with the dog in the morning light, and Claire came and stood beside him on the porch, and neither of them said anything, and the lake went on doing what it had been doing since long before any of them arrived. After a while, Lucy ran past them both, Maxwell at her heels, and she glanced up at the two of them standing side by side on the porch, and she made absolutely no comment whatsoever, which from Lucy was the loudest thing she'd said all weekend. The drive home was 3 hours. Lucy lasted 45 minutes before she asked. She'd been quiet coming out of the lake house, helping carry bags, saying goodbye to Maxwell with the specific solemnity of a child who understood she might not see this dog again and was giving the farewell its proper weight. She'd hugged Margaret long enough that Margaret had to gently disengage, and Margaret had whispered something in her ear that Lucy received with a serious nod, like a message being committed to memory. She'd said goodbye to Grant, who had shaken her hand. Actually, shaken her hand, like a formal adult acknowledgement, and told her she was the most interesting person he'd met all weekend, which Lucy said was the nicest thing anyone had said to her since her teacher told her she asked excellent questions. She'd gotten in the truck, Claire's SUV back in the driveway behind them. Both vehicles pointed south, both heading to the same city, and buckled herself in and watched the cedar trees go past, and Daniel had thought maybe she's going to wait until tomorrow. She did not wait until tomorrow. Dad. Yeah. Are you and Claire going to date? He kept his eyes on the road. He'd been a single father long enough to know that certain questions deserved straight answers and certain questions deserved honest answers, and sometimes those were different things. This was a case where they needed to be the same. I don't know yet, he said. Why not? Because it's complicated. Because she's your boss. Partly. What's the other part? I thought about how to say it in a way that a 7-year-old could understand without reducing it to something that wasn't true. You know how when something matters a lot, you want to make sure you're doing it right before you start, instead of starting and figuring it out while you go. Like when I wanted to build that birdhouse, and you made me look at the instructions first. Exactly like that. Lucy considered this. I looked at the instructions, and it still fell apart. That's because the instructions were wrong. What if the instructions are wrong this time too? Then we rebuild. He glanced at her in the mirror. That's the thing about building something falling apart, isn't the end of it. Giving up is. She looked out the window. Pine trees giving way to highway. The city still 2.5 hours ahead. She held my hand, Lucy said. When we walked in the first night, I grabbed her hand and she let me. I know, I was there. Some adults pull away when kids grab them. They don't want to be touched by people they don't know. I know that too. She didn't pull away. Lucy said it carefully, the way she said things when she was delivering information she considered important. even though she was nervous. I could tell she was nervous. Her hand was cold. Daniel said nothing. "I like her," Lucy said. Simply finally the way she said everything that mattered. "I just thought you should know." He nodded. "Okay," she said. And she put her headphones on and went back to the window, and Daniel drove south with the radio low, one hand on the wheel and one hand resting on the console. And he thought about cold hands and fixed doors and a ring in his shirt pocket and the specific weight of things that needed to be done right. Monday morning. He drove to work the long way. Not because of traffic, he knew every shortcut in this city, but because the long way went past the school where he'd been dropping Lucy for 3 years, and he needed the drive to think. He'd spent Sunday quietly. Unpacking. Laundry. Grocery store. Rosa called him honey and asked how his weekend was, and he said, "Good, different, good." He'd fixed the loose hinge on the bathroom cabinet that had been on his list for 2 weeks. He'd cooked dinner, helped Lucy with the homework that had been assigned before the weekend, read 3 chapters of their book. Normal life reasserting itself with the gentle insistence of normal life. He'd thought about Claire. I thought about what she'd said on the dock. I'm not sure I know how to do this without controlling all the variables, and the way she'd said it. The specific quality of vulnerability in a person who was very rarely vulnerable, and he'd thought about all the reasons it made sense to drive in Monday morning and say nothing and go back to the equation they'd started with. He'd also thought about Lucy's hand in Claire's at the front door of the lake house. Cold hands. Didn't pull away. He parked in his usual spot. He went up to his office, which was a shared space on the 3rd floor of the Whitmore development building. A desk among other desks. Functional, nothing personal on it, except a photo of Lucy from last Easter and a small cactus she'd given him because she said it was impossible to kill, and that made it appropriate for his desk specifically. He sat down. He looked at the cactus. He thought about Margaret in the kitchen handing him a plate. Just be honest. The rest figures itself out. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus Webb. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about something." The meeting with Human Resources happened at 10:30. Daniel had gone to Marcus first, not to explain the weekend, because the weekend was the weekend, and stayed there, but to open a specific conversation about reporting structures. Marcus had listened with the careful attention of a man who understood that when a senior supervisor called a Monday morning meeting about org structure, it was either very good or very complicated, and the expression on Daniel's face suggested the latter. Then Marcus had called HR. Daniel sat across from Jennifer Park, the head of HR, who had a reputation for being extremely thorough and completely unreadable, and he explained what he needed without explaining why he needed it. "I want to request a formal restructuring of my supervisory chain," he said. "Specifically, I want to ensure that my position reviews, compensation decisions, and employment pathway don't route through the CEO's office." Jennifer Park looked at him. She looked at her computer. She looked back at him. "That's an unusual request." "I know. Do you want to tell me the reasoning?" "Personal. Not disciplinary, not performance-related, not adversarial. Just personal preference for clear professional boundaries." Jennifer Park was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm going to need to loop in Ms. Whitmore. Any restructuring at the senior supervisor level." "I know. You understand that means she'll know you requested this." "Yes." Another pause. Jennifer Park typed something. "I can have a preliminary structure drafted by end of day. It would route you fully through Marcus with regional oversight going to the VP of operations. No pathway to the CEO's desk. That's what I need." "Daniel." Jennifer looked at him over her glasses with the specific directness of someone who'd been in HR long enough to know when they were seeing the surface of something larger. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is better than all right," he said. "That's actually the problem I'm solving for." She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her expression shifted, not quite a smile, but close. "I'll have it drafted by 3. He stood. He thanked her. He went back to his desk and looked at the cactus and thought one part of it. "I didn't see Claire until 2 in the afternoon." He was in the elevator going to the fourth floor for a quarterly operations meeting when the doors opened on 3 and she walked in. She was in full CEO mode, tailored charcoal suit. Hair up the specific expression that had earned her the Ice Queen name from employees who didn't know that the ice was a management strategy and not the person. She was looking at something on her phone when she stepped in, and then she looked up and saw him, and the briefest thing happened in her face. Not a smile. Not warmth exactly. Something quieter than both of those. Mercer. Whitmore. The doors closed. The elevator went up. HR called me, she said, looking forward, not at him. I figured they would. You requested a reporting restructure. Yes. She was quiet for a second. You could have come to me directly. If I'd come to you directly, you might have said no. I might have. And then we'd be having a different conversation. She looked at him sideways. You went through HR, so I couldn't override it on instinct. I went through HR so it was documented and formal and real, he said, because I meant it. She looked forward again. The elevator was slow. He'd always thought the elevators in this building were slow. I'm signing the documentation this afternoon, she said. Okay. After that, your employment pathway has no intersection with my desk. I know. Which means, she paused. Which means on a professional level, you're no longer someone whose livelihood I control. Correct. And you know what that means for the other conversation. It means we can have it, he said, without the wrong reasons built into the foundation. The elevator reached 4. The doors opened. Neither of them moved for exactly 1 second. Then she stepped out. She walked toward the conference room. Halfway there, she stopped and turned. There's a diner on Clement Street, she said. The one with the blue sign. Do they have good milkshakes? He kept his expression neutral. I have no idea. Someone told me Lucy knows every diner in a 12-block radius with a milkshake rating system. That's an exaggeration. It's 8 blocks. Saturday, she said. Noon, if you want. He looked at her across the corridor. She was holding her phone and her folio, and she looked like herself, the full version CEO, and dock at midnight, and worn college sweatshirt, and all of it at once. And he thought about level ground and honest starts, and what it felt like to deserve the answer you were giving. We'll be there, he said. She nodded once. She walked into the conference room. The door closed. Daniel took the stairs back down. Saturday came the way good things come when you've stopped trying to control them quietly without fanfare, a regular morning that happened to matter. Lucy picked her outfit the night before, which she only did for important occasions. She chose the blue dress with the yellow flowers, her good shoes, and asked Daniel if her hair looked better in 2 braids or 1 braid, and he said 2, and she said she thought 1, but she'd go with 2 since he was trying. They took his truck. Not Claire's SUV, not a car service. His truck with the dented door on the passenger side and the constellation of old coffee stains on the dashboard that Lucy had named and personified into an ongoing story that she'd been telling for 2 years. The diner was the kind of place that had been on Clement Street for 30 years and looked at good bad linoleum. A counter with rotating stools, booths with red vinyl that had been patched so many times, the patches had patches. The kind of place that smelled like coffee and maple syrup and honest cooking and didn't apologize for any of it. Claire was already there. She was sitting in a booth by the window in a simple green sweater and jeans with her hair down, and she was looking at the menu like she was studying a contract. And when the bell above the door rang, she looked up and something happened in her face that she didn't manage to compose before Lucy was across the diner and sliding into the booth across from her. They have strawberry, Lucy announced, pointing at the menu. That's the one I'd get, but the chocolate one has hot fudge on it, which is technically a different category. Are those the options? Those and vanilla, but vanilla doesn't count. Why doesn't vanilla count? Because vanilla is what you get when you don't have an opinion yet. You can have vanilla while you decide. Once you decide, you graduate. Claire looked at the menu. I've never thought about milkshakes this way. Most people haven't. That's the problem. Daniel slid into the booth beside Lucy. He looked at Claire across the table. She looked back at him. Small table. Normal diner. No catering staff, no lake, No family watching. Just this. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. And that just hi with nothing underneath it except what it was the first real thing they'd said to each other. The waitress came. Lucy ordered strawberry without deliberating because she'd deliberated last night and was prepared. Claire ordered chocolate. Daniel ordered coffee, which Claire looked at. "You're not getting a milkshake." "I'm 42% sure I'm a coffee person." "You've been a coffee person your whole life. You're allowed to be both." "Is this a comment on life philosophy or milkshake ordering?" "Both," she said, and the corner of her mouth went up, and he thought, there it is. He ordered the chocolate too. Lucy looked at both of them with the satisfaction of a person whose system had worked. They talked through lunch the way you talk when you're rebuilding the version of someone that's portable, not the lake house version, not the office version, but the Tuesday afternoon at a regular diner version that has to work in normal light. Claire asked Lucy about school, and Lucy told her about the class project on ecosystems and the ongoing dispute with a classmate named Owen, who kept saying sharks weren't technically fish, which Lucy disagreed with on both scientific and philosophical grounds. "He's not wrong, actually," Claire said. Lucy stared at her. "Sharks are cartilaginous fish. They're classified as fish. Owen is incorrect." Lucy turned to Daniel with the expression of someone receiving vindication they'd been waiting for. She said, "I'm right." She said, "Owen is incorrect. That's not exactly the same thing." "It is absolutely the same thing. Scientifically," Claire said carefully, "they are fish. But I'd encourage you to go look it up together, because the knowing matters more than the winning." Lucy thought about this. She ate a French fry. She considered. "Okay, but I'm going to know faster." "Probably. And then I'll tell him." "You can tell him gently." "Can I tell him firmly, but not meanly?" "That's actually the correct setting," Claire said. "For most situations." Daniel watched this exchange happen across the table and thought about Margaret saying she talks about your daughter far more than you realized, and thought about Claire crouching down in a parking lot to be at eye level with a 7-year-old who was afraid she might have digested a tooth, and thought about cold hands that didn't pull away. He thought, this is the person who's been there the whole time. After lunch, while Lucy was in the bathroom, and it was just the two of them at the table with the milkshake glasses pushed aside and the afternoon light doing something decent through the window, Daniel looked at Claire. "How did the week go?" "Long. Good." She turned her coffee mug. "I turned down Richard's investment." He went still. "Claire, officially, formally, through our legal teams." She kept her voice even. "Not because of the weekend. Because of the 6 months before the weekend when I kept almost signing the agreement and something kept stopping me and I couldn't name it." She looked at him. "After Saturday morning, after the dock, I could name it." "What was the name?" "The same thing you said on the elevator. Wrong reasons built into the foundation." She paused. "I don't want to grow the company on money that came with strings I didn't read. I'd rather grow it slower and keep the whole thing mine." "That's going to cost you." "Less than the alternative." He studied her face. "Are you sure 42 million is Richard Hale's 42 million, which means it comes with Richard Hale's access and Richard Hale's opinion about every major decision I make for the next decade." She said it plainly. "I've already spent 6 years building something my father handed me broken. I'm not going to let someone else decide what I do with it now." "Okay. Okay. You know your company better than anyone. If you looked at the deal and said no, you said no for a reason." He shrugged. "I trust the person making the call." She looked at him for a moment, with an expression he was starting to be able to read, the one that meant she'd expected a different response, and the actual response had landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to, and she was deciding what to do about it. "You do that," she said. "Do what? Just accept things, decisions, without second-guessing them back at me. You're smart, and you know your situation. Why would I second-guess you?" "Most people do. Most people probably have a stake in the outcome. And you don't." He met her eyes. "Not in that decision. That's yours." He paused. "I have a stake in other things." The diner moved around them, a couple at the counter, a family in the far booth, the waitress refilling coffee without asking. Normal Saturday afternoon machinery. I looked up that diner on Clement Street, Claire said. You're sitting in it. I mean before Saturday, before I suggested it. She looked at the table. I looked it up Wednesday evening, after I signed the reporting restructure. I sat in my apartment and I looked up diners within 8 blocks of your address, and I looked at the menus and I thought about which one you'd take Lucy to and which one she'd rate highest, and... She stopped. I don't do that. Research people's personal preferences, personal lives. But you did. I did. She looked up at him. I've been doing it for longer than this weekend, longer than I've admitted to myself. He was quiet. I told myself it was just attention, professional awareness, knowing your people. She exhaled slowly. That was convenient. When did you stop believing it? She thought about it. When I drove to a utility room on a Friday afternoon instead of sending an email, I could have sent an email, or called Marcus, or had my assistant reach out. A pause. Instead, I drove across the city in work clothes to ask you personally, and I told myself it was because you deserved a direct conversation. She looked at him steadily. That was also convenient. But true. Also true. She wrapped her hands around her mug. Both things can be true. Yeah, he said. They can. Lucy came back from the bathroom and climbed back into the booth and looked between the two of them with the evaluating gaze she'd deployed at 7-year intervals throughout her entire life, and apparently concluded that whatever had happened in her absence was satisfactory because she picked up her straw and went back to the last of her milkshake without comment. They stayed another hour. Lucy told Claire about the birdhouse that had fallen apart and the instructions that were wrong, and Claire listened and asked questions and did not once look at her phone, and Daniel noticed that filed it in the growing catalog of things about Claire Whitmore that made sense when you stopped sorting them into the wrong category. When they left, Claire walked them to Daniel's truck. The afternoon had gone warm, the particular warmth of late summer that remembered everything and was getting ready to let go of it. Lucy climbed in, buckled herself, immediately located her headphones. Daniel stood by the driver's door. Claire stood on the sidewalk. Same time next week, he said. She looked at him. Milkshakes, he said. Or somewhere else. Doesn't matter. He paused. Just same direction. She looked at him for a long moment. Not guarded. Not composed. Just present. Yeah, she said. Same direction. He nodded. He got in the truck. She stood on the sidewalk and watched them pull into traffic, and she was still standing there when he checked his mirror at the end of the block. Lucy pulled one headphone off. She watched us drive away. I know. People only do that when they care. I know, Luke. She put the headphone back on. He drove home through the good part of the city, the part with the trees that still had leaves, and he thought about 12 months of Saturdays and what they could build in that time if they built it right. The months that followed were ordinary. That was the important part. Not the grand gesture, not the turning point, not the dramatic moment that reorganized everything in an instant. Just ordinary Saturdays that accumulated into something. Third Saturday, a different diner. Lucy's choice. She gave it 7 out of 10 docking points for inadequate hot fudge distribution, but awarding bonus points for the fact that they had a dog bowl outside. 6th Saturday, Daniel's apartment, because Lucy had a cold and couldn't go out and refused to let the visit be canceled, and Claire arrived with soup from a deli 3 blocks away that she'd apparently been standing in front of for 20 minutes before going in, and she sat on Daniel's couch and watched a movie with Lucy while Lucy ate soup and fell asleep before the 3rd act. And Claire and Daniel sat in the quiet of his apartment for 2 more hours, talking about nothing specific and everything real. 9th Saturday, Claire's apartment, which Daniel and Lucy visited for the first time. It was large and clean, and it had floor-to-ceiling windows and a kitchen that looked barely used, and Lucy walked in and said, "It's beautiful and also lonely." And Claire looked at Daniel, and he looked at the ceiling, and Lucy said, "I mean it in a nice way." And Claire said, "I know." And they cooked dinner together in the barely used kitchen, and it was the best thing that had happened in that apartment in a long time. He got better at reading her. Not the CEO. He'd always been able to read the CEO from across conference tables, from work orders, from decisions that filtered down through 3 management layers. He got better at reading Claire. The particular silence that meant she was genuinely tired as opposed to strategically quiet. The way her posture changed when she was worried about something and hadn't decided to say it yet. The fact that she made terrible coffee every single morning of her life without exception and had never questioned whether the problem was her or the process. She got better at reading him. She stopped interpreting his quiet as distance. She learned that when he fixed something in her apartment, the cabinet hinged the window that stuck the outlet that sparked once and made her genuinely nervous. It wasn't him being an employee or demonstrating usefulness. It was just him, the same way Margaret had understood it, reaching for whatever needed doing without needing to be acknowledged for the reach. She also learned that he pushed back. That his quiet wasn't the same as agreement. That when he disagreed with her about the direction she was considering for the East Side properties, about a management decision she was leaning toward once memorably, about a movie choice that he called baffling, and she defended with genuine passion, he said so clearly, and didn't soften it to make her comfortable. "You're the only person in my life," she told him on a Wednesday evening at her apartment somewhere around month 4. "Who says no to me like it costs you nothing." "It costs me something," he said. "I just think it costs more to not say it." She looked at him. "Do you know how rare that is? In your world, maybe. In mine, it's just being a person." "In your world," she said, "people have consequences for disagreeing with me." "I used to." She was quiet for a second. "And now?" He looked at her steadily. "Now I just have an opinion. And you have one. And we figure it out." She leaned back against the couch cushion. "I'm trying to get used to that." "How's it going?" "Better than I expected." A pause. "Slower than I'd like." "You can't restructure everything." "I can try." "I know you can." He looked at her. "I'm not going anywhere while you figure it out." That sentence, "I'm not going anywhere," sat in the room for a moment. She looked at him with the expression that meant something had landed somewhere real. "Okay," she said, quiet, final, the way she said things when she'd decided them. He nodded. They watched the rest of the movie. Outside the window, the city did what cities do in autumn, going gold around the edges, letting go of summer, reorganizing itself for what came next. And inside the apartment, on a couch in a kitchen that was less lonely now, 2 people who had done the necessary work of building level ground were sitting on it. Not rescued. Not owing each other anything. Just there. Just choosing. 1 year is both a long time and no time at all depending on what you fill it with. Daniel filled it with work, his own work now, not just Whitmore developments. He'd spent the winter quietly building the framework for something he'd been thinking about for 3 years. A small property restoration company, 2 employees to start focused on older residential buildings that larger developers passed over because the margins were too thin and the work too particular. He did it slowly, the way he did everything that mattered. He didn't quit his position at Whitmore. He built alongside it the way you build anything real, one reliable piece at a time, until the structure could hold its own weight. By spring, he had 4 contracts. By summer, he had 7. By the time Margaret's birthday came around again at the end of August, he had a company that had his name on it and was paying its own way, and he had not borrowed a dollar from anyone, and he had not asked Claire for a single contact or introduction, and she had not offered one because they both understood without discussing it explicitly, the way they'd come to understand a lot of things, that the level ground they'd built required him to stand on his own half of it. She noticed anyway. She always noticed things. "You have that look," she told him on a Friday evening at his apartment somewhere around month 10. She was sitting at his kitchen table with her laptop and a glass of wine, which had become a thing that happened on Friday evenings, without anyone scheduling it. "What look?" "The one you get when something you built is doing what you built it to do, like the screen door." He looked at her. "You remember the screen door." "I remember everything." She looked back at her laptop. "It's both a professional skill and a personal inconvenience." He sat down across from her. "The Hargrove building came in under budget. First time any project I've run has come in under budget on the first pass. Daniel. By 9%. She looked up from the laptop, and she smiled, not the suppressed, cautious version he'd gotten for the first months of knowing her, but the real one, the one that reached her eyes and made her look like the person she was when nobody was watching. 9%. It's not 42 million. No, it's yours. She held his gaze. That's better. He thought in that moment about the ring in the back of his sock drawer. He'd moved it there from his shirt pocket when the shirt went to the laundry, and he'd been moving it forward, pocket to dresser to drawer, ever since, the way you carry something carefully because you're waiting for the right surface to set it on. I thought about it, and he didn't say anything, and he went back to making dinner, and Claire went back to her laptop, and Lucy was in the next room doing homework with the focused intensity she brought to anything involving maps, and the apartment was full of the specific warmth of a life that had found its right size. He knew that Friday evening that he was close to the surface he'd been looking for. Margaret's birthday fell on a Saturday at the end of August, the same weekend, the same lake 1 year out from the version of it that had changed everything. The invitation had come from Margaret directly, a handwritten card addressed to Daniel and Lucy, separate from whatever invitation Claire received, which Daniel suspected was Margaret's way of making a point. He accepted without asking Claire first. He told her afterward. She looked at the card and then at him and said, "She didn't invite you through me." "No. She invited you." "Yes." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good." They drove up together, the three of them, Daniel driving this time. Lucy sat in the back and briefed them both on the things she'd been saving to tell Margaret for a full year. The ecosystem project, the birdhouse rebuild that had actually worked. A book she'd read that she thought Margaret would like, the update on the Owen situation, which had resolved peacefully after Lucy showed him the correct scientific classification, and he'd said, "Huh, okay," and they'd moved on. "That's it?" Claire asked. He just said okay. He said huh first, then okay. I think that's his way of saying I was right without saying I was right. That's very diplomatic of him. I know, I told him that. He said thanks. Now we're in the same reading group. Claire turned in the passenger seat to look at Lucy fully. You turned an argument into a reading group. The argument was about facts. Once the facts were clear, there was nothing left to argue about, so we just kept talking. Lucy shrugged with the calm confidence of someone who had figured out something most adults spent decades missing. That's how it usually works. Claire turned back to the road ahead. She reached over and put her hand on Daniel's arm briefly without comment. He didn't look at her. He kept driving north. He understood what she was saying. The lake house looked exactly the same and completely different the way places look when you return to them carrying more than you left with. Maxwell ran 3 circles around the car again. Margaret came to the door again. The dock was there, and the boathouse, and the particular quality of late August light on the water that knew the summer was ending and was doing its best work because of it. But Grant came out the door grinning and shook Daniel's hand, and then without ceremony, shook it again like once wasn't enough. Patricia hugged Lucy before she'd made it 3 steps from the car. The house smelled like Margaret's cooking and old cedar, and the specific warmth of a place where something good had happened and the walls remembered. Richard was not there. Nobody mentioned Richard. Lucy found Maxwell, and the two of them immediately resumed their relationship exactly where it had been left, as if no time had passed, which Daniel understood was the specific genius of dogs and 7-year-olds. Margaret held both his hands when she greeted him at the door. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him a year ago, the same clear, direct examination, and then she looked at Claire beside him, and she said nothing, just nodded once like a confirmation of something she'd been tracking. "You look better," she told Daniel. "I sleep more." "That's Claire's doing." "That's my own doing," he said. "She just made it easier to stop working at midnight." Margaret smiled. "Good." She patted his hand and let go and turned back inside. "Cornbread in 20 minutes. Lucy, you remember where the plates are." "Cabinet left of the stove," Lucy called from the yard. "That's my girl." The day moved the way good days move when you stop trying to manage them. Lunch on the porch. A walk along the shoreline where Margaret pointed out the same landmarks she'd pointed out the year before, and added new ones, a family of herons that had nested near the far bank, a section of dock her husband had repaired 30 years ago that still held. Grant and Daniel talked about the restoration business with the ease of two people who had recalibrated their read of each other and found it better the second time. Patricia told Lucy about a marine biology program at a university 2 hours north that did summer camps for kids, and Lucy filed this information with the specific intensity of someone updating a long-term plan. The birthday dinner came with candles and good wine and old photographs, and Margaret at the head of the table, 80%. The same woman she'd been a year ago, and 20% something quieter, smaller, the way time works on people you love. She ate well and laughed often, and told a story about Edwin that none of them had heard before, something that had happened the year they built the lake house. A mistake he'd made that he'd never admitted to anyone until he told her, and even then, he'd made her promise not to tell the children until he'd been gone long enough that it was funny. "He's been gone 8 years, Grant said. "Is it funny now?" "It's been funny for 6, Margaret said. "I've just been saving it." After dinner, the dishes were cleared and the candles burned lower, and the conversation split into smaller pieces, the way evening conversations do, and Lucy fell asleep against Margaret's shoulder with the unashamed totality of a child who trusts completely the person she's sleeping against. Daniel watched Claire carry Lucy upstairs, the same room as last year, the same careful navigation of a sleeping child in an unfamiliar hallway. He watched her come back downstairs and look at him across the room with the expression that had stopped being hard to read somewhere around month 3. He nodded toward the door. She picked up the light jacket she'd left on the chair. They walked to the dock. The lake at night in late August is a different thing from the lake in late August morning. The water holds the day's heat a little longer. The stars do more. The dock feels like the edge of something rather than the beginning of it. They stood at the end of it together, the same place, the same dock, the same water, and Daniel looked at the reflection of the stars in the surface and thought about all the versions of this moment he'd considered and discarded in the past several months. The version with a restaurant and a speech. The version with a speech and no restaurant. The version where he'd asked Grant first, or Margaret first, or Lucy first. He'd discarded all of them for the same reason they all involved someone else's staging. This was just the dock, just them. He reached into his jacket pocket. Claire was looking at the water. She knew something was happening. She always knew. She read rooms and silences and the particular quality of a person standing still when they would normally be moving. She turned before he spoke. He opened his hand. The ring sat in his palm, catching starlight. Margaret's ring. Edwin's ring. E&M 1974. The gold worn smooth on the inner edge from 50 years of being exactly where it was supposed to be. Claire looked at it. He watched something move through her face. Recognition first, then the history of it, then something that went past both of those into something he didn't have a word for, except that it was real, and it was hers, and she wasn't composing it for anyone. "Margaret gave it to me," he said, "before we left last year. She said keep it until I knew what I wanted to do with it." He looked at the ring. "I knew for a while. I just wanted to make sure I was saying it on ground that was actually level." Claire looked at him. "You restructured the reporting chain," he said. "I built the company. We did 12 months without owing each other anything and choosing each other anyway." He looked at her steadily. "The ground is level, Claire." Her eyes were bright in the dock light. She wasn't composed. She wasn't the CEO. She was just a woman standing on a dock at the end of a summer, looking at a man who had done everything in the right order for exactly the right reason. "The first time this ring showed up," Daniel said, "someone else made the choice. Somebody decided what it meant and put it on my finger while I was asleep, and the whole thing started from the wrong place." He looked at her. "I'm not asleep this time. And I'm not asking because of the lake house or your family or anything that happened last year. I'm asking because of 12 months of Saturdays and your terrible coffee and the way you listen to Lucy like she's saying something worth hearing, which she is." He paused. "And because you're the only person I've met in a long time who made me want to stop building a house for people and start building a life with one." I was still holding the ring in his open palm, not yet kneeling, not yet performing the shape of the moment. just holding it out the way you hold something out when you want someone to take it of their own choosing. He knelt. Claire pressed one hand over her mouth, and she made a sound that was not crying, and was entirely crying, and she looked at him with everything. She was not the ice queen, not the CEO, not the woman who'd spent 6 years building walls precisely calibrated to keep the wrong people out. Just Claire, who had figured out slowly and honestly what she wanted, and had waited for it to exist on terms she could trust. "Marry me," he said. "Not because anyone arranged it. Not because it's strategic or practical or convenient. Just because it's us. And I'd like it to be us for a long time." From somewhere behind them on the lawn, behind a stand of cedar trees that provided significantly less concealment than she believed, Lucy made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a scream, and was trying very hard to be neither. Claire laughed. She was crying and laughing at the same time, and she looked at Daniel and then past him at the tree where Lucy was very unsuccessfully hiding, and then back at Daniel. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." He stood. He put the ring on her finger, her hand, her left hand, the finger where decisions that last go, and she looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something that has found its right place after a long time of being kept for this purpose. Then, Lucy abandoned all pretense of hiding and ran across the lawn and hit both of them at once, which was physically impressive for a 7-year-old, and Margaret appeared in the doorway of the lake house in her robe, with an expression of complete and total satisfaction that she'd been wearing since approximately the moment she'd mailed the birthday invitations, and Grant could be seen in the window behind her, looking at the dock and looking away with the expression of a man who had something in his eye and was handling it privately. Lucy was saying 17 things simultaneously. Daniel had his arms around both of them. Claire was looking at the ring. "Looks better," Margaret called from the doorway, "when you know why you're wearing it." Daniel looked at her across the lawn. Then he looked at Claire, who was looking back at him with the ring on her hand and her whole face open. Then he looked at Lucy, who was explaining to both of them at the same time that she had known this was going to happen since approximately the first Saturday at the diner, which she had not said anything about because she was being patient, and patience was hard, and she felt that this should be acknowledged. "It's acknowledged," Daniel said. "Thank you," Lucy said. "I was very patient." "You were," Claire said. "You were extremely patient." Lucy thought about this. "I want to be a bridesmaid." "You're going to be more than a bridesmaid," Claire told her. Lucy considered the implications of this with the serious deliberation it deserved. Then she nodded once decisively and went to tell Maxwell the news because Maxwell deserved to know. They got married in October beside the lake on a Saturday because Saturdays had been theirs since the beginning. Not a production, not a performance. The family, a few close friends, a small tent against the chance of rain that wasn't needed. The same dock, the same water, the light that Margaret called her favorite doing what it always did in October, going gold and clean and certain. Lucy walked Claire down to the dock in a blue dress she'd chosen herself. Claire wore a simple ivory dress that she'd bought at a shop 3 blocks from the apartment and had not agonized over, which was how Daniel knew she was sure. Margaret gave Daniel the ring permanently at the start of the ceremony, put it in his hand, closed his fingers around it, and said nothing. She didn't need to say anything. He put it on his own finger this time, of his own choosing. When it was done, when the ceremony had happened, and the moment had been what it was supposed to be, Margaret came and found Daniel where he was standing at the edge of the dock, watching Claire and Lucy and the dog at the water's edge in the October light. She came and stood beside him. "Looks better," she said quietly. "Just that. Just once." He looked at his hand. The ring on his finger worn smooth from 50 years before him, his to wear for 50 more. Not because someone put it there in the night. Not because a family arranged it. Not because of leverage or obligation, or the comfortable path or 2 balance sheets combining into one. Because he had held it carefully for a year, and waited for the ground to be level, and then asked with nothing in his hands but the question itself. Claire turned from the water and looked at him across the dock, and Lucy was beside her with her hand in Claire's, and the lake held them all in its October light, and Daniel Mercer, who had spent 12 years building homes for other people, and forgetting to build one for himself. Looked at what was standing there waiting for him, and understood fully and finally that the most important thing he had ever fixed was the one he'd been afraid to touch. Real love is not being rescued by someone with more than you. It is finding someone who refuses to use what they have against you and stays anyway when neither of you owes the other anything at all. The ring on his finger caught the light,